An alien calling voice made its way through the immense noise in my head. Suddenly the guy saw a stranger towering above him, who was interested in the appearance of another alien from another world. He opened his huge green eyes in bewilderment. Resting his knees on the street paving stones, he peered at the man in amazement, while the blue haze from the movement dissipated around him. Behind us, the buildings of the town were lined up in a row under the reliable protection of the mountains. The stranger scratched the back of his head, wondering how to find out more about the stranger. Finally, he tried to carefully calm the guy down, but absolutely confused, seeing how he begins to take off his t-shirt in a panic. The world where the hero has moved is called Akron. It is there that you can meet beautiful girls, warriors, powerful magicians and strongmen, but not only. In Akron, you will face a horde of demons and monsters, because of which there is a struggle for survival in this world. Aliens from other dimensions often come here, but they begin their journey precisely in this city, the border, Akron. The man asks the guest whether he is strong in magic or martial arts, but he, blushing, shakes his head. The guy is even more perplexed by the new nickname Classless. That's what they called him. Having learned from the newcomer his name, Noah Miller, the man promised to take care of the newcomer, explain where he ended up, and feed him. Noah tearfully thanked his savior. Entering a dark alley, the benefactor asked if the stranger wanted to drink. Hearing agreement, he held out the flask. Then, turning around, he carefully made sure that the guest tasted its contents. Noah threw back his head and began to drink greedily, and then he sharply inflated his cheeks, dangling liquid in them. The next moment, the kindly offered drink poured onto the man's face. Finding himself blinded, he could only curse the guy who laughed at the gullibility of the defeated stranger. Noah recognized the goblin poison of paralysis, and assured that it tingles much stronger in the eyes than on the tongue. The man, roaring in pain, could not believe his ears. The stranger realized that they wanted to deceive him and sell him into slavery. Spitting out the remnants of the poison, Noah listened to the cries of pain and insults in his direction. He sharply dodged a blind blow, confirming that he was far from a novice, and had just been drafted to Akron out of class. The guy's leg shot up and with a sharp blow caught the poisoner's butt. Then Noah's knee ended up right on someone else's chin. He also did not forget to mention during the fight about 13 years of experience in battles. With a sharp movement, Miller pulled out a dagger from his opponent's bosom. The very next moment the tip passed along the man's neck. Noah idly asked if the villain remembered the rules. Akron don't trust anyone. He finished what he started, then turned away from the splashes of blood flying at him, and muttered through his teeth that Akron, the worst world in the universe. 10,000 coins and only one dagger. Noah looked at the trophies he received with disappointment. Thinking that it was not bad anyway, the guy looked at himself sadly. At the beginning, he didn't even think about taking off his clothes. In this way he checked what his body turned out to be like in the new world without scars and mountains of muscles. He found himself in the past when he first appeared in Akron. The thought flashed through Noah's head that the artifact had worked. Being a 27-year-old mercenary of rank C, he lived poorly and earned money for future use. Life passed in search of a solution to the main problem, the inability to achieve fame, but he had neither talents nor noble origin. Seizing every opportunity, the mercenary found an unexplored dungeon. There, having won the battle, he discovered a small chest, which he opened with great hope. But disappointment overtook him when Noah saw only a stone in the chest, the mystery of which he could not understand for a long time. A system notification showed that the homecoming stone had been activated, and its owner would be sent back 13 years in time. Miller recalled that this was the last thing he saw right before his death. Everything indicated that this was the purpose of the stone, to return its owner to the past. Now the young fighter asked the system to show his characteristics. Alas, all acquired skills and abilities were reset. Grabbing his head, Noah could not believe that he had returned to the starting point, and even with the same characteristics, he was stung by the thought of the pointlessness of his return. Fortunately, 13 years of combat experience were not in vain. The most striking events from the past came to mind. You can always take advantage of some extra class privileges. For example, a chiropractor, whose shop, by a fortunate coincidence, was located in front of the guy. Yes, Akron famous for its arrivals from other worlds, magicians, martial arts masters. But the most frequent visitors to these lands are non-class. They can become whatever they want, and even gain the opportunity to gain accelerated growth. But in practice, classless are the very bottom of the food chain. Akron. Noah Miller is one of those who have no abilities, but only a struggle for survival. humiliation, and poverty for 13 years. All that awaited him was an inglorious death. The mercenary did not know what joy and the taste of victory were. But now the local chiropractor, lowering his glasses, asked if the young patient really wanted surgery to improve his skeleton. Noah Miller was unshakable and was willing to do anything to make his life better. The system came alive with glowing signs about upgrading the skeleton to a low-level martial artist, as well as learning the celestial concentration technique. The mercenary clasped his hand with excitement. Finally, he has 2 directions for growth. Previously in Wyoming he did not even imagine such an opportunity, thereby closing the door to fame. Now the new skeleton structure will allow you to easily master martial arts. Noah was promised free services in exchange for spreading the word, but at the cost of incredible pain. It turned out that the prerequisite for skeletal enhancement was to remain unskilled and classless. Miller didn't know about this in the past and missed his chance. The guy convinced himself that this time he would do everything right, because now his characteristics contain data on a huge advantage over an ordinary skeleton, the possibility of quickly mastering the skill of martial arts. The chiropractor will not live long, which means that in the future there will be no such classless ones, only one Noah. The heavenly concentration technique is a basic technique for accumulating spiritual energy. This is the second opportunity for growth. There are many techniques for working with energy. They differ in the level of control over the latter and the speed of concentration. In his previous life, Noah learned the ordinary second-level concentration technique, but only now found out that in the old bookstore Wyoming there is a book about the first-level technique. Fortunately, the second-hand bookseller had no idea about its value, and sold the book for only 40,000 coins. The guy proudly walked forward, triumphantly holding the book in his hand and thinking about the corrected mistakes of the past. 2 out of 3 chances were not missed. The third remained to win a prize in a tournament in the Coliseum, exactly 1 year from now. Since the tournament is only for non-classes, the requirements for participants are low. Noah walked along the road and thought about the upcoming victory. He would devote all his free time to training, but first he would find a job. Stopping in front of a local merchant, the mercenary decided that he would become a monster hunter. The merchant, raising an eyebrow, looked at Noah with a mocking glance and asked what he needed. The guy enthusiastically pointed to the lying armor, while the merchant ironically muttered about the small size of the armor and wanted to take a closer look. Miller, playing along, enthusiastically pointed at various objects on the floor. The merchant, scratching his beard, asked how much money the guy had. Hearing the amount, the man laughed. What else? 60,000 coins, and at least 300,000 for bottles, weapons and armor. Noah cautiously asked if he could take it in installments, but the merchant was unmoved. Suddenly the man perked up when he heard a new proposal. Noah decided that he was ready to part with his clothes for the sake of his dream, and made a tempting offer to the merchant. With his eyes widened, he listened as the guy enthusiastically talked about the technology of sewing his clothes, and about the huge possible revenue for an outfit. The answer was the merchant's loud laughter. It seemed that no one had ever made him laugh like that before. Laughing, he ridiculed Noah for trying to get pity, swearing with a classless tooth that his buyer was still too young. The merchant continued to reproach the guy for cheap tricks. Finally bursting into laughter again, the man appreciated the young man's attempts to bribe him. He then handed the armor to the startled Noah. The merchant said that he respects people who are willing to do anything to survive, and will be glad if his goods help Miller. He chuckled when he heard about his debt of 240,000 coins, and squinting, thanked the man. Finally Noah, dressed in armor, held a heavy spear in his hands and felt the cold steel of new knives behind his back. He did not regret that he spent all his savings and got into debt, because even light armor increases the likelihood of staying alive. The mercenary began to think that in his previous life no one had ever done him such favors. Had luck really begun to favor the young man? But nevertheless it cannot be ruled out that they simply want to profit from him and betray him. It is better to be careful. Noah stood in the middle of the thicket, clutching a spear in his hands. He looked at the sky and remembered how he first came here to hunt in a previous life. An unhappy, frightened boy with a homemade wooden weapon in his hands. How he has changed now, endowed with strength and new skills. Yes, 13 years ago Noah was so pathetic. The system began to play with new notifications. You remembered the techniques: lightning leap, steel breaking skeleton, stonebreaker blow, spirit knocking spear. Suddenly the air became restless and the leaves rustled. The mercenary's gaze caught movement from the side. Having walked quite a bit, he found himself right in front of the spotted prey. The vile green goblin screamed, startled by the unexpected appearance. Holding the handle of the spear in his palm, Noah took aim in a split second, and he sharply pushed the end of the weapon with the other palm of his free hand. The shining and sharp tip of the spear passed through the goblin's mouth, sticking out at the back of his head. Technique: spear knocking out the spirit. First movement, killing shot. The spear, sticking out in the monster's head, whistled through the air, dragging him into the bushes, and in the next moment firmly pinned the goblin to the ground, landing there. Noah clenched his teeth and felt his palm burn. Kill shot is a technique for firing a spear using the left hand. At first it leaves burns on his palms. The guy thought it wouldn't hurt to get calluses. But no pain could overshadow the joy of victory. Maybe he still didn't see the point in this return, but now Noah has a chance for a better life. Meanwhile, somewhere in another world, an unknown young man in red robes was sitting on the floor, meditating, in the lotus position. Suddenly, right at the top of his head, a mysterious blue haze appeared in the air. The very next moment the stranger woke up and found himself in a whirlwind that intended to take him somewhere. A second, and only that same haze remained in the room. Noah Miller, raising his head, looked at the city tavern, which was welcomingly beckoning with the bright light from the windows. The fat-cheeked innkeeper greeted the guy as he walked inside. He beamed with joy when he recognized the stranger. Noah nodded while Hayes, clutching a heavy bag in his hands, he told the man that he had brought him payment for the night. When Will asked how the mercenary would pay, he answered that he would pay with the same thing as always, lowering the bag onto the counter. The bag, or rather the purse, was magical. Miller immediately hid the spear in it. The acquisition did not escape the innkeeper's eye. Noah told about the discount from his merchant, who praised the guest's business acumen, extending his hand to today's currency. The man examined the goblin's teeth and the blood serum lying next to him. Pleased that this would be enough for a couple of days, he assured that the Guild of Magicians would not give the guy even a coin for them. Will praised Noah again, but the guy was confused, asking what was so talented about that. The man told how he was surprised by the out-of-class boy on his doorstep who offered to pay his rent with the fruits of the hunt. He did not expect him to live long. For 2 weeks now he had been regularly receiving his pay after a night hunt. Noah's surprise turned to anger at these words, especially when the innkeeper mentioned the poverty that accompanies those out of class. Hayes continued his speech, but when he compared Noah to a certain Max, the mercenary turned around in the middle of the conversation and walked towards the stairs. Darker than a cloud, he muttered to the indignant innkeeper that he was tired, and went upstairs. Noah clenched his hand into a fist, his nails digging painfully into his palm. Standing on the threshold of his room, the mercenary's head was beating with the thought that talent was not about him, and did not suit him at all. In his previous life, he was just an ordinary C-rank mercenary. Noah Miller, a low-level martial arts practitioner with few skills, not even 5 stars. Heartbreaking spear technique, lightning leap, metallic blood exoskeleton, stonebreaker technique. He learned these techniques in a previous life. But these are just second-level combat techniques. You won't get far with them, because if he comes across someone truly strong, the damage will be felt no heavier than a bird's feather. There was only hope for the first-level technique, the stonebreaker strike, and the celestial concentration technique. The mercenary, sitting on the bed, continued to clench his fists in impotent anger. All his skills did not provide endless energy. He, getting more and more excited, exhaled loudly. A real fighter needs more complex martial arts techniques. The next day, Noah was called out at the bar. A pretty girl stopped him halfway, asking if he was going hunting. Daughter Will innkeeper, Nikki, stood at the counter, strictly placing her hands on her hips, and wondered why the guy was risking his life in vain. Miller explained with a sigh that for him, an alien, this was the only way to make money. Nikki, wagging her index finger, reminded Noah that he could always look for a regular job. Sighing, she offered to work in the family tavern, especially since Will, her father, spoke well of the guest. The mercenary shook his head. He could neither cook nor clean. The worried girl did not give up trying to convince him, because learning the craft of an innkeeper is not as risky as risking your neck every day while hunting. Noah smiled faintly at his thoughts. He headed towards the door, telling the indignant woman at his disobedience, Nikki, that he'll be back by lunchtime. No, the mercenary has already lived one life as an opportunist, working in a rundown tavern, unable to say no to anyone. Noah then smiled flatteringly at the always dissatisfied owner, trying to save his job. Walking towards the exit, the guy thought that he could live like this. But he would no longer waste his life on this. This time he will do everything to take possession of what made the mercenary envious. Given the chance to start over, Noah Miller is sure to succeed. His attention was drawn to the loud sound of bells, gathering passers-by to the center of the action. The midday bell rang out across Wyoming's main square, and this meant that new aliens would soon appear in this city. A portal appeared near the dried-up fountain, glittering with pale blue flowers. From there appeared a handsome long-haired young man with red eyes and a matching red and black hanbok. As he stood and looked around in surprise, Noah thought that the alien could be his age, studying martial arts. The mercenary examined the young man, confident that the local bandits would immediately notice his behavior. They didn't have to wait long. Two men with a mountain of muscles found themselves next to the young man, holding out the same flask of poison that they treated Noah to on the first day in Akron. Miller stared at them wide-eyed. But the next moment, he shook his head. It didn't concern him. Intending to leave, he turned sharply and slammed his forehead into something hard with all his might. Exclaiming, the guy slowly raised his head. Squeaking sorry, he saw a mountain of muscles in front of him. Their owner, a creepy-looking bandit with a scar on his cheek, bared his teeth and said that Noah had broken his collarbone. Without further ado, a fist in a hard leather glove immediately flew into the guy's face. The giant swung with such force that the mercenary was thrown several meters to the side. The couple was quickly surrounded by a crowd of passing residents. Stretching his hands forward, the bandit began to assure passers-by that the impudent man had broken his collarbone and got what he deserved. He narrowed his eyes and said with a smile that he was just teaching a lesson and the boy would pay him compensation. Nothing to look at all. Apparently, such events happened often, because people immediately dispersed. The comrades of the bandit named Ozzy would call out to him, continuing their acquaintance with the alien, and he, approaching the defeated Noah, told them about the broken collarbone. The defeated mercenary realized how unlucky he was. The men were from the same gang, and Ozzy had good fighting skills. The big man's friends laughed, because the short man could only reach Wood's rib, to which he assured with a creepy smile that there was no difference, and that someone else's rib would also be broken. The bandit was a third-class hand-to-hand combat practitioner, but this is what no one knew. Hand-to-hand combat skill is divided into classes, starting with third and ending with the highest master. Being a low-level martial artist, who usually quickly master the necessary skills, the guy himself had not even reached the third grade. Having grouped himself, Noah assessed the enemy hanging over him. He understood that victory alone was not worth waiting for. The locals of Wyoming were indifferent to strangers. The decision came with lightning speed. Miller screamed with all his might, warning the victim about the poison in the flask. He froze, holding the bottle in his hand halfway to his mouth. The mercenary did not know whether his peer would be of any use, but assumed that the young man had been called up from Salinas, and should at least be able to do something. In the ensuing silence, the long-haired stranger poured the contents of the flask onto the ground. The enemy turned to Noah and shamed the guy for his unworthy act, assuring him that there would be buyers for him among the perverted nobility in the city. The bandit, determined not to stop, bent his leg, intending to strike again. The guy had a different opinion. He couldn't leave it like that. The offender should get what he deserved. Noah's first step towards victory was a lightning-fast leap. The mercenary jumped sharply to the side. The advantage of his exoskeleton called metal blood allowed Miller to first stun his opponent, only to fall in the next moment with a powerful elbow strike right into his back. With their mouths agape, the partners in crime collectively called out Ozzy. The mercenary, meanwhile, switched to the stonebreaker technique when the fighter's fists seemed to multiply several times during an attack. The guy jumped back, breathing heavily, to assess the bandit's condition, but he giggled disgustingly, as if all those techniques for him felt like the bites of an ordinary insect. Ozzy would, straightening up and bursting into hoarse laughter, assured that he would not be left with such a fight. Noah, already wounded, now put out his fist, bloody from blows to someone else's chest. Assessing his chances of winning as 0, he was amazed at the bandit's reaction. He clearly knows some kind of defensive techniques. And the rest of the gang, as if just now waking up, decided to flee. Despite the narrow-mindedness of the Wyoming guards, after all, they could still come in response to the noise. Miller did not share their opinion. He let out a scream and became furious, ran towards Ozzy. The victim also perked up. He looked with all his eyes at the unfolding scene. Noah saw someone else's fist aimed at his face getting closer and closer, and realized that he could not win in hand-to-hand combat. His hand reached into the magic bag in his bosom, intending to pull out a spear, but then the unexpected happened. Miller did not have time to take out his weapon when an alien flew up to him and loudly demanded to repeat what the guy shouted to him. Then Noah stared in amazement at the grinning stranger next to him. What a bad time. The enemy's fist was already close, and the distracted guy only managed to shout that now was not the time to chat. In response to this, his interlocutor did an incredible thing. He moved his palm to the side and with his fingertips touched the fist that had overtaken them. Everything happened in a split second. Noah, without even taking out his spear, saw would fly away from an invisible blow. The white magical haze from the magical blow gradually dissipated, and the stranger calmly complained that they dared to interrupt him. Like a bandit ball, having fallen, he knocked down his comrades, and now they rested peacefully on the ground, falling on top of each other. A drop of sweat ran down Noah's cheek. He immediately recognized the palm strike with a charge of spiritual energy. And this is not even the second or first class of hand-to-hand combat. Was this handsome young man, Miller's age, drafted just a couple of weeks after him, a master whose rank in the class was one step lower than the highest? The stranger, or rather the small heavenly demon Liam Vash, as the shocked Noah assumed, asked with a polite smile to tell him where he ended up. Here's what Miller knew about the Sky Demon cult. They were members of an unorthodox sect that worshipped power and strength. The strongest among them always becomes the leader, the heavenly demon, and his offspring young leaders. And now, the young man standing in front of the mercenary was none other than the newcomer from Salinas, the young leader, the small heavenly demon, Liam Vash. Noah recognized him. He has master-level techniques. Once in Akron, he soon became famous, the same age as Miller himself, reaching heights as soon as he crossed the threshold anywhere. The mercenary could not believe his eyes. It really was him, the young leader, in person. Later, impressively sitting on the bed at Noah's house, Liam introduced himself to the still stunned owner of the room. He obediently said his name in response, noting in amazement that his guest was 13 years old. He was a year younger than Noah. Pumping his fist, the red-eyed young man looked at Miller with interest and said that he was intrigued by Akron, because this world was completely different from his native one. Vash did not expect that when asked if there was a celestial demon cult here, Noah would answer in the negative. Suddenly the newcomer burst into contagious laughter. Then he sharply raised his head and pierced the mercenary with his gaze. The insinuating voice reminded Noah that it was he who shouted to the demon in the square when he forbade him to drink poisoned water. The mercenary opened his mouth in surprise, not understanding what the master was driving at. Liam laughed again, and suddenly accused the owner of the room of disrespecting himself, because he dared to address the leader on a first-name basis. Noah bowed, answering that he did not know about the status of the young son of the elder heavenly demon. Gritting his teeth, he looked at the floor and thought about how humiliating it was to bow before a 13-year-old boy. There was silence. Vash seemed to be enjoying the spectacle with a satisfied smile on his lips. He pointed his finger at the mercenary, and said that he had watched the fight in the square. Noah heard something he didn't expect. He was shamed and called stupid. The skills acquired with such difficulty, which the guy was so proud of, turned out to be completely worthless in the eyes of the demon. The execution of the techniques was terrifying in its clumsiness. The young leader was perplexed who could teach the unfortunate man to fight so absurdly. From what he heard, Noah began to shake. Veins appeared on his forehead from tension. He asked what Liam was leading to. At first, the mercenary thought that the master was angry, but he stopped smiling and looked seriously at his interlocutor. He extended his hand and said that he would teach Noah martial arts. Like a fish, Miller opened and closed his mouth. Did he really hear it? Will this heavenly demon really give such a gift, and not deceive? Folding his hands on his chest, Vash said that he would take Noah as a student, and he would at least get rid of his clumsiness, and the latter could not believe his ears, and kept asking whether he would really be taught. The demon nodded, but set only one condition to the inspired Miller. With a dull look, the mercenary only squeaked a quiet yes. Which one? Liam solemnly announced to Noah that he should make friends with him. Miller opened his mouth in shock, not making a sound, and the next moment he closed it, slowly lowering his head. Pale and sweating from excitement, he stared at Vash with a silent question in his eyes. Let's fast forward briefly to the master's childhood, when on one of the clear distant days the baby loudly called his father. Smiling toothlessly, the heavenly demon loudly announced that he wanted to make friends with someone. The father was surprised by what he heard, not understanding why his son thought about it. To this, the boy held out a book. It was in it that it was said that no trouble was scary with a friend. Hearing from his father that this was indeed the case, the demon beamed. But only for a second. It turned out that this was the privilege of mere mortals. Flashing his fangs, the leader of the celestial cult Amrit Vaish menacingly ordered to forget about nonsense. After all, one day his son will become a military leader of hordes of demons. The ruler doesn't need friends, he said, and advised Liam to practice martial arts rather than read all this nonsense. The younger demon squeaked in agreement, jumping at the leader's order. The father watched as his son, furrowing his eyebrows and sniffling resentfully under his breath, ran away. It gave him no pleasure to see his child's sadness, but the man could not help it. Amrit worried a lot about Liam, especially when it came time to train. One day he called together 50 very weak fighters to fight a minor demon. A 10-year-old child dealt with them with ease. It scared even his own father. He just hoped the lot wouldn't fall on Liam. Now 13-year-old Liam stood in front of a man in an unfamiliar world and invited him to be friends. As the heir of the Sky Demon cult, he grew up under relentless attention and great expectations placed on him. And with such responsibility and endless training, there was no time to make friends. Noah wondered why the choice fell not on him. Was the young master really not friends with his peers? But Vash was already extending his hand to shake and smiling sincerely. Then he solemnly appointed Noah Miller as his friend. For a second he imagined himself in his previous body. He is 27. But he has to be friends with a 13-year-old boy. Liam kept his promise and began to teach the mercenary martial arts, namely the Purple Path. The Way of Violet Dawn is an art created by an unorthodox sect of demons. The energy when performing it is purple in color. Noah was surprised. He thought that he would be taught the martial arts of heavenly demons, while the guy addressed the demon with respect, remembering how he was reproached for disrespect. The smile disappeared from Vash's face in 1 second. Leaning closer to Noah, he reminded in an even voice that friends address each other as you. The puzzled mercenary could only stutter and agree with the demon. In response, he shone brighter than the sun. Liam said that he could not teach his friend the way of the heavenly demon. This school of arts was only intended for the heavenly demon and his heirs. The Way of the Violet Dawn is a very good fighting art, he said, and assured that Noah would like it. The training went on as usual. Miller thoughtfully touched the cut on his cheek, stepping on the dead goblin sprawled under him with his right foot. A month has passed since an incredible coincidence of circumstances brought him together with Liam Vash, and he began to teach the mercenary the path of the Violet Dawn. Noah became stronger, and the defeated goblin was not alone. A bunch of his brothers lay in dying poses in a forest clearing. Currently, the mercenary was roughly halfway between second and first-class martial arts proficiency, a huge achievement compared to his previous life. But Noah's opinion was not shared by his teacher. The demon complained, calling him devoid of talents, that the lessons of the great Liam were in vain, and that in a month he could have learned much more. Miller, boiling inside, could not allow himself to express everything he was thinking about the demon. Having retreated, he went to collect all the most valuable things from the goblins. Suddenly the trees cracked and a huge silhouette appeared behind the thick branches. Noah, not believing his eyes, watched as a huge orc rushed towards him. He immediately pointed a spear at the monster, which was still covered in blood from the previous battle. He felt relieved. He was glad that he reacted so quickly to the danger. But where did this orc come from here? Noah glanced to the right to see how many more enemies might be attacking him. But not a single rustle came from the trees in that direction. Looking to the left with only his eyes, he also saw nothing. And there was no one in that part of the forest either. But who knew how insidious orcs are? Did he really come alone? The mercenary swung using technique spear, knocking out the spirit, killing shot. A crimson stream of blood flowed from the wounded monster. The orc, defeated, fell to his knees. Noah, in turn, pulled out the blade of the spear and jumped back. The mercenary smiled boldly, appraising his trophy, and a malicious voice was heard somewhere behind him. Liam, he mocked the pride of killing one orc. Noah knelt down on one knee, looking at the carcass lying on the ground, still surprised by the presence of orcs in these parts. A strange voice was heard from behind. Its owner had probably been watching the battle all this time, and now praised the young man's skills, despite his age. The mercenary turned around and looked at the stranger and asked who he was. The man apologized, clasped his hands in the traditional greeting, and stated his name, Ethan Garcia, known in the capital as the Orchid Sword. Miller thought his sword was too familiar, but he didn't show it, and asked what Ethan wanted from him. The warrior pointed his finger at the dead monster. This orc was not so ordinary. Garcia brought the guy to the main square and introduced him to his company. A man with manners and appearance similar to a monkey, Toby Foster, whose name was Monkey, displeasedly asked his friend why this boy had surrendered to them. Garcia pointed to the silent Noah, assuring that his skills would be useful to them. Another warrior, Black Dagger of Rain Marcus Torres, a gloomy young man in a half-face mask, introduced himself and supported Ethan. A girl with an unusual hairstyle ran up to them to introduce herself, but in a more friendly way. With a beaming smile, it was Jaren, the witch from Abilene High. She eagerly asked Noah what kind of work he would get here. The guy shrugged. He guessed in advance. Ethan said that a tribe of orcs had recently set up camp near the city. Monsters are not afraid of anything. They attack villages and travelers. Gesturing vigorously, Garcia announced a reward of 20 million coins from the mercenary guild, which would be received by those who killed the entire tribe, and with trophies the prize would be approximately 35 million coins. Noah asked how the reward would be divided. The man counted him and his team exactly 5 people. The mercenary, tapping his finger on his lips, thought he could get about 7,000 coins. Such an opportunity does not come along often. The only problem is whether these people can be trusted. The thought flashed through my head that this guy, Ethan, was not being too honest with the others. A shadow passed over the young face, but Miller, with the same thoughtfulness in his voice, agreed. The man grabbed him by the shoulders and laughed. He praised Noah for making the right choice, confident that together they would complete this task much faster. The guy dropped his hand from his shoulder and politely thanked Garcia. Then he turned and pointed questioningly at 2 drooping, strong men who were sitting nearby, loaded with huge backpacks. Ethan waved his hand. These were non-class porters, and he also asked Noah where he was from. The guy, watching the unfortunate people towards whom Jaren was walking with a cheerful step, replied that he was from Salinas. When Garcia said that these out-of-class people were to be paid for transporting their equipment, the witch asked one of the porters to buy her some apples, and dropped a few coins into his palm. Ethan indifferently continued to say that those 2 were of no interest. He spoke about them as if they were animals. Just say it, and they will follow you. But for some reason Noah became angry at these words. He nodded when the warrior suggested they set off. And yet something haunted Miller when he looked at the smile of his new acquaintance. Janier got the apple and now chewed the fruit with pleasure as she walked. The whole large company slowly approached the entrance to the forest. Noah asked the monkey how many orcs would be in the camp. He replied that there would be about 50, but perhaps the battle would only be with 30 of them. Orcs are stupid and clumsy creatures, the warrior continued with a grin. This is an easy job, you just need to take them by surprise and wait it out, they will have the money. Ethan, when asked about strategy, suggested splitting into 2 groups. The little warrior, as he called Noah, would go with him. Marcus Torres, Toby Foster and Lady Jaren would go with him, and each group would have a porter with them. Having split up, they lure the orcs out of the camp, in other words, divide and conquer. The witch raised her hand and created a small whirlwind. She explained that she would use wind magic to make their scent spread throughout the forest. Because orcs do not like strangers on their territory, so they will want to deal with uninvited guests. Toby continued, they will walk straight into their ambush, and when they arrive, Jaren will use his combat spells. Ethan was clutching a flare in his hands. They planned to light it to lure the other part of the orcs. The plan, in his opinion, was simple. In this way they would divide the monsters into 2 fronts and deal with them. Noah thought that the plan was not bad, although it was simple. More traps could have been prepared, but there was neither time nor people for this. Garcia, seeing a stick with a skull on top and with scraps of fabric on it, a kind of mark of the location of the orcs, noticed that this was already their territory. The skull glowed ominously with empty eye sockets, grinning numerous fangs to the travelers. Here they separated and wished good luck and a glorious battle to each other. Then Noah, Ethan and the porter continued their journey through the forest, the 3 of them. The guy heard the out-of-class man breathing heavily behind him under a pile of things. They had been walking for half a day. For someone like him it must have been hard. Drops of sweat ran down the porter's face, and his breathing became increasingly heavier. The mercenary stopped and turned around and asked the man's name. He didn't even expect that they would turn to him, and asked again. But still, smiling through force, he said his name, John. Noah became serious, and said that he was not sure whether he could protect him when the battle with the orcs began. The porter stopped in confusion, and Miller gave him a choice: move on or run away. The guy glanced sideways at Ethan walking ahead. He certainly wasn't going to defend the out-of-class guy. He didn't even pay attention to their conversation. John, unable to catch his breath from the heavy walking, croaked that he could not escape. Noah knew firsthand what the guild would do to a man if he tried to escape. In his past life he was beaten so badly for this that he barely came to his senses. The mercenary nodded and advised the man to defend himself by any means. He, surprised by the sudden concern, agreed. Garcia stopped and enthusiastically informed the little warrior that they were there. Fortunately, they did not come across any of the monster patrols. The trio stood in a clearing surrounded by trees. A fence was visible ahead. It was an orc camp. The man took out a flare to lure the orcs, but Noah stopped him. The guy opened his belt pouch. Ethan immediately noticed that the mercenary had a magical, dimensionless pouch. He narrowed his eyes enviously when he heard that Miller got the item, according to him, due to pure luck. Noah took out a tub of water and explained to his surprised companion that it was necessary to knead the mud and cover it with it to mask the smell. Garcia, watching Noah's fuss in the mud, enthusiastically praised the little warrior's knowledge and intelligence. The guy did not respond to the praise, but said that he learned this from his teacher. Then he invited his companion to do the same. For the next few seconds the man, like a crazy pig, obediently rolled around in the mud. It was the porter's turn. Noah made a new batch of camouflage mud for him. Finally, the silence of the forest was broken by the noise and red trail in the air from a signal flare. The orcs, baring their teeth, perked up and began to look around in search of strangers. Sitting down on the ground and bending one knee, Ethan, with an indifferent look, suggested that the little warrior send a porter forward. He explained his tactics this way: it would be more convenient to send an out-of-class to distract the attention of the orcs, while the rest of the group attacks the monsters from behind. The answer to this was a stunned look from the porter and a face darker than a cloud from what Noah heard. Sweating with fear, the man prayed that he would immediately die from the clutches of the monsters, but he assured that this would not happen. Ethan looked carefully at the unfortunate man and insinuatingly whispered that if he did not carry out the order, he would certainly die at the hands of the warrior himself. The man's mouth dropped open in shock as a burst of laughter rang out from the warrior, who assured him that it was just a joke. Noah bit his lip, silently deciding something. He slowly stood up, lowering his head and dangling his right hand, while the guy held his spear tightly with his left. He told the surprised Ethan that if no one objected, he would go first. The corners of the warrior's lips rose slightly. He did not dissuade his partner. 13 huge and armed orcs were moving towards them. Noah did not hesitate, and barely noticed a green carcass among the trees. He immediately used one of the fighting techniques with a spear, aiming at the enemy. The unsuspecting monster opened its mouth wide, watching the tip fly towards it. -1. Miller, surrounded by monsters, sharply turned his spear from side to side. And so, when 2 orcs, choking on blood, flew away to the side, there were already 11 of them. Noah seized the moment, and assessed the number of opponents, wondering if the remaining monsters were up to him. But he immediately interrupted himself. There is no need to think like that, he can do them. Unexpected thoughts flashed through his head. Why did he feel sorry for the porter? What was in it for him? How pointless it was to be merciful. Maybe it was sympathy. They are no one to each other, not friends at all, the mercenary thought while he fought with the orcs. However, they are both classless, and that is quite enough. The monsters were momentarily taken aback by the attack coming from such a small opponent. After all, whoever is stronger is the law. Miller rushed forward with his spear at the monsters. This is the rule, very straightforward and cruel. During general training sessions with Liam, he always blamed his student for weakness. Towering over him, the demon ordered him to be grateful for his patience, saying that he needed to remember every word and movement. The master regularly taught how to hold the spear correctly. It was necessary to hit from a distance, so he would become stronger. The blade flashed in front of the orc's face. It was level 3, a soul-crushing spear. Hit! Noah ordered himself and rushed forward, using the necessary technique. Each orc got what he deserved, the wounds from the tip of the spear glowed in their chests. A lightning-fast splitting blow, and now the monsters, not having time to drop their weapons from their paws, scattered in different directions. Ethan struck several more with his sword, jumped high, and struck with lightning speed. Noah noticed out of the corner of his eye that one of the orcs was already bending over the lying porter with a huge club. He, weak and unarmed, covered himself with his hands and let out a heart-rending cry. An instant, and the mercenary's spear pierced the monster's back and passed right through. Covered in dirt, with someone else's blood on his face, Noah held a weapon with an orc impaled on it and looked at the bearer. The team froze in the ensuing silence. Around them lay the bodies of orcs, and in some places their parts. Garcia walked around the clearing and with professional movements cut off the ears of the orcs' heads. A total of 13 killed, he said, throwing the loot into the bag. The warrior thanked Noah, who was still leaning on his knee and holding a stained spear, and also said that he was cutting off the ears of the orcs as evidence. The man assumed that the other group had already dealt with the others, then threw the bag of trophies to the porter, which he almost dropped. The guy looked thoughtfully into the distance, nodding when Ethan suggested finding their companions. John, clutching the bag given to him in his hand, headed out of the forest. Passing by Noah, he whispered with his lips, "Thank you." He looked back and followed the lonely figure. Tired, covered in dirt, the guy stood, not knowing what to think. Toby Foster sat on a stone at the exit of the forest, and could not wait for the trio. Finally, a small team appeared on the horizon. Jaren enthusiastically stuffed her mouth with a bun. The monkey said that everything went well, and they had dealt with the orcs a long time ago. He asked why the little warrior, Ethan, and the porter were all covered in dirt. The man laughed hoarsely, sweating profusely, and replied that everything went like clockwork, especially thanks to the little warrior. Marcus Torres suddenly perked up and listened. Narrowing his eyes, Ethan grinned and said that the real battle for them would begin only now. Noah straightened up, sensing something was wrong. Marcus immediately extended his hand, and something whistled in the air. A second, and a dagger was stuck in Jaren's chest. The girl froze, rounding her green eyes. She only managed to gasp, opening her mouth absurdly, falling to the ground. Time stood still. Toby Foster was still sitting motionless on the stone. He stood up in shock. Behind him Ethan was already unsheathing his sword. Noah threw his spear forward, right next to the man. He, narrowing his eyes, asked unkindly not to interfere. Memories from the past filled his head. The owner shouted at Noah, hurried him and promised to deprive him of payment for disobedience. The guy hurried, scurrying around the square, carrying a huge sack on his back. The mercenary was sweating from the weight and trudged forward, constantly apologizing. Suddenly he saw a crowd, but could not see the reason for the excitement. His overseer shouted again, "Has this out-of-class guy never seen an execution?" Folding his arms across his chest and grinning carelessly, the man said that a particularly dangerous criminal, a mercenary from Salinas, had been brought to the square. The crowd parted and it became visible the guillotine, in which the criminal was already located. According to Noah's owner, he went on the case with his partners, but killed them to collect the reward. He was caught on the spot. Miller looked fearfully at the face of the one whose neck would soon be cut by sharp steel. And now, in the forest, the guy again peered into those same eyes, which were now burning with an insane fire. Ethan, holding the sword in his hand, chuckled. He did not expect such a quick reaction from little Noah. He said that he seemed to know everything in advance, to which Miller grinned. Of course he knew, because he had already seen the traitor in a past life. 13 years have passed, but it is difficult to forget this. For the first time in his life, the young man was present at an execution. The veins on the man's temples trembled. He said that there was nothing to do. He himself saw how the boy fought with the orcs. Preparing to attack, he nevertheless praised Noah, saying that he was a good fighter. And starting to run towards the mercenary, he shouted that he was still stronger. Noah waited. A second-class fighter, he himself is only on the way between third and second, and this is a very strong difference, but don't despair. The out-of-class realized that he was excellent at reading Ethan's movements. Right now he was preparing for a slashing blow. He raised his spear up, deciding to stop the enemy on the approach. The blade almost entered the man's stomach when he got too close. Noah grinned. The experience of his past life and the lessons of the little demon helped him a lot. The warrior managed to dodge the spear and was now standing a few meters away from Noah. The man shouted, asking how long he could hold out, but suddenly croaked without finishing what he said, and blood sprayed from his mouth. Putting his hand to his mouth, he, choking, asked Noah in shock what was happening, and he calmly replied that the poison was to blame. The guy poured a long-acting poison into the mud in which Garcia smeared himself. But the poison itself was not fatal, since it did not enter the stomach. The man clutched his sword fiercely, but his hands were shaking, which meant he couldn't cope even with a weaker opponent. Miller, without letting go of the spear from his hands, inquired about the warrior's further actions, but he suddenly noticed a porter standing to the side. Ethan rushed towards him. Noah continued to stand, not understanding what would happen next. But his opponent figured out how to buy time. He pressed John to him in front and put a sword to his throat. What a low act! The distraught warrior hissed to Noah that if he moved, the porter would die. The guy was dumbfounded. Thoughts were racing in his head about how to help the porter. Garcia, now staring wildly, had previously seen Noah's good attitude towards John, and now felt that he had come across a soft-hearted idiot. Ethan bared his teeth, spitting blood from his mouth to the side. The little warrior would definitely have no choice. Miller still could not understand the enemy's motives. Did he really seriously decide to do this? Does he think he can survive if he takes the porter hostage? Noah slowly stepped forward. In response to this, he was warned that the next step could be fatal for John. But still, he has been a mercenary for so many years, and is the only reason to help John. Just because they are both classless. Garcia, sucking blood from his nose and grinning triumphantly, was sure that luck was on his side. Noah shook his head. This was not the time to argue, especially with such exhaustion after the battle with the orcs. If it weren't for this, the mercenary would have most likely killed Ethan before he even had time to come to his senses. But you can't act with all your might. It could end in tears. Behind, Toby and Marcus were fighting to the death, and since the effect of the poison can end at any moment, after the death of the monkey, Noah will have to fight with two opponents. There was no choice. We had to act now. The porter, sweating profusely, wheezed intensely. The next moment, he sharply moved his leg behind his captor's knee. They both fell onto their backs with the sword still dangerously close to John's neck. Noah, seeing this, reached forward, screaming his name. The porter fell on top of Ethan, who squealed, cursing him, trying to get out. Finally, withdrawing the hand holding the sword, he plunged the sharp blade into the side of the classless one. The warrior's bloodshot eyes looked into the eyes opposite, in which life was slowly fading away. He hissed to the porter that he had to be obedient. Miller walked right up to the lying men. His face darkened with rage. His eyes widened. Garcia begged the little warrior not to do anything stupid. Noah, putting the remaining strength into the blow, sharply lowered the spear straight into the warrior's chest. Toby turned around at the death rattle. He was wounded with a dagger in the shoulder, but Foster defeated his rival Marcus Torres. The little warrior was on his knees, holding a spear tightly in his hands. He looked at the dead porter, a pool of blood slowly flowing from his mouth. Ethan and Marcus are dead. Monkey and Noah received a reward for the orcs from the mercenary guild, and divided the proceeds with trophies between them. Liam beamed when he saw his friend on the doorstep. He had finally arrived. He said offendedly that he was late. Noah nodded, answering that he was at work. The mercenary collapsed on his back on the bed without taking off his boots. Sprawling on the blanket, his thoughts returned to the battlefield. With a little more strength, John could have been saved. Frowning, Noah thought that he definitely didn't want to do in his new life something that he would be ashamed of until his old age. The previously silent demon, like a judge, approached his roommate, as if reading his thoughts. He confidently told Noah that he had killed a man, and when Miller was surprised, the master explained that he smelled blood. The mercenary covered his eyes with the back of his hand and said that he fought with a second-class fighter. He had no choice. Vash sat down next to him on the bed and spoke to Noah again, saying that he was clearly hiding something else. Miller withdrew his hand and looked at his friend without a word. The demon's eyes lit up with a dangerous fire. He demanded to know what he was silent about. The mercenary sat up in bed under the attentive gaze of the leader. He swallowed hard, trying to put a calm expression on his face, and answered the question with a question. What could he be hiding? Noah asked Liam if he really thought a classless fighter couldn't defeat a level 2 fighter. He waved it off. Not at all. With the help of the Path of the Violet Dawn it is possible. But Noah is different. He is special. The heavenly demon knew what he was talking about. Once in Akron, he wandered around Wyoming for a long time, trying to understand this world. Liam was not only in idle places, but tried to visit the dirtiest corners in order to notice all aspects of people's lives. He quickly realized what a classless life was. The boy saw the most outrageous actions of locals who could not, or did not want, to achieve a better position in society. He looked down on them as he passed by, thinking about what nonentities they were. According to Vaish, people usually kill insects with ease, while not everyone is able to kill a small animal. To do this, you need to cross a certain line within yourself. Noah, without taking his eyes off the young man's figure, listened to him silently. The master noted that on the first day of his call, the mercenary immediately went into the forest to hunt. Miller immediately objected that there was nothing unusual in this, because otherwise he would not have survived. Liam smiled and said that this makes sense. But why does Noah think that other out-of-class people live like this just because they don't understand it? They understand everything, but do not dare to end someone's life. The demon looked slyly at his friend and folded his arms over his chest. In addition to the fact that Noah is out of class, he is also a teenager. Something doesn't add up here. He objected that it was just an ability mimic, but Liam did not support the game. He caught his roommate in avoiding questions, but these were not all suspicions. Noah has no abilities. This hit Miller's pride worse than a knife. He quickly lay back on the blood and offendedly turned his back to the demon. But he did not give up. He kept saying that even such a glorious teacher as himself is useless if the student cannot master more than a third of the material. But what intrigued the master most was that no more than 3 weeks had passed since Noah had been hunting with a spear, and his skill was already very good. Liam scratched his chin thoughtfully. As a rule, the weakest point of a beginner is a lack of control over internal energy and footwork, but he did not notice such mistakes in Noah. The mercenary once again sat up in bed, while the demon asked how could a person without abilities master a spear so well in just 3 weeks. A shadow seemed to run between him. The demon looked expectantly at Noah, asking who he really was. Noah himself was silent, cracking his knuckles. Finally, he raised his head and in an even voice told his friend that he did not understand what he was talking about. Liam opened his eyes and said insinuatingly that he really didn't like being lied to. The friends silently faced each other again. Noah was the first to break the silence. He carefully said that everyone has personal matters. And is it right to pry into someone else's personal life? Is this really what a friend does? The demon bit his lip and was thinking about something. After a few seconds, he came out of his stupor and joyfully said that since Noah has secrets, it means that he himself has them. Vash put his hand to his chest and said that he could exchange his secret for Miller's secret, but he assured that he did not need other people's secrets. The inspired master was unstoppable. In addition to his secret, he, bending his fingers, promised to teach his friend an incredibly powerful technique, the art of wielding a spear or the art of movement during a fight. You just need to choose. Noah exhaled in disappointment. The evil irony was that he did not have the ability to master the teachings, and did not have the internal energy to fully implement them. Liam, raising one eyebrow in confusion, thought for no more than a second. He nodded without a second thought, and agreed to give the mercenary a quarter of his energy. It wasn't a fair move for Noah. He seemed to tremble all over from what he heard, but the demon simply replied that he was too curious. Being his only friend, Vash must know everything, including what he keeps secret. This is exactly how the demon saw friendship between people. A heavy sigh was heard from the mercenary. Lowering his head, he asked the demon to promise not to kill him for telling the truth. He sincerely did not understand why he would do this to his friends. Liam was delighted, and reaching for the elastic band in his hair, said that he would be the first to tell his secret. A shock of long, jet-black hair spilled over her shoulders. All this time, Vash was a girl. Noah felt as if he had been hit on the head with something heavy. His eyes became the size of 2 coins. His mouth opened so wide that he could swallow a huge pie hole. Winding a strand of hair around her finger, Liam said that this had to be done for the sect, because only a man can become the leader of the heavenly demon sect, and her father said that she should live like a boy. The mercenary could not come to his senses even after the story. The demoness explained that even after she came to this world, she continued to hide. When asked to tell his secret, Noah covered his face with his hands in despair. He needed to collect his thoughts. Before his confession, he muttered that he and his newly made girlfriend needed to move in, but she didn't understand why. Miller, throwing his head back, loudly sucked in air, urging himself to calm down. His long bangs fell into his eyes as he sat up straight in bed. Having looked carefully at the demoness, the guy admitted that he was a returnee. Her eyes widened, but she didn't seem to believe it too much. The silence of the night was shaken by a girl's cry. What kind of nonsense? Liam asked if this means that Noah died and then went back in time. Sitting on different beds, Miller lowered his head, while the demoness reasoned out loud that she believed the guy, and that this situation explained a lot. Raising her finger up, she said that anything could happen in this world. Perhaps if they were in another, it would be difficult to believe the story. Noah watched the girl with a frown. She asked why her friend decided that she would want to kill him. Holding his breath, Miller exhaled and said that although he had incarnated himself as a 14-year-old teenager, his real age was 27 years old. Approaching Vashish's face, Noah asked if she was offended that he had not told her his real age, and the girl believed that she was seeing someone of the same age in front of her. She shook her head. Everything turned out differently. Noah looked at the demoness in surprise. She explained why she was not upset. After all, she was the first to approach Noah. Later she offered to teach him martial arts. Well, then she offered to be friends, in which case Miller did not deceive her, he simply agreed. The mercenary was embarrassed by such logic. Liam also said that for her, everything told was not a reason to kill, and even more so, it did not call into question their friendship. The demoness spent 3 weeks next to him. They shared meals together, studied, communicated. This is what real friends do. The girl smiled and expressed the hope that Noah was satisfied with this answer. He opened his mouth in surprise, intending to say something, and he immediately pressed his lips into a thin line. There was no need to say anything out loud. Everything was already clear. Thank you. This word hung palpably in the air. It seemed as if an adult man, with his head bowed in shame, was sitting in front of a girl wise beyond her years, and before that no one had ever spoken to him so sincerely. Liam herself ruined the moment by noting that she sympathized with how small the level that Noah had achieved in his past life was. Devastated by the sincere conversation, the mercenary stupidly looked at one point. At that moment the demoness jumped up. Smiling widely, she solemnly said that right now she was ready to transfer a quarter of her internal energy to her friend. Noah raised his head sharply. Had he really heard it? It was worth explaining how serious it was. So, chi energy. It is accumulated by a martial artist for use in battle, and it is this that gives superpowers. With the help of concentration techniques, martial artists gradually increase their energy potential, and work on this throughout their lives, achieving incredible potential over the years. This is the basis of the power of a fighter. Both warriors moved to the same bed. Noah took off his top of clothes, and now sat with his bare torso with his back to Liam, and she put her palm to his back, and thus created a connection between them. The transfer of energy potential is a rare phenomenon. The demoness noticed how dirty the guy's blood vessels were. Moving her hand higher, she lightly squeezed the mercenary's neck with 2 fingers, which frightened Noah and said that at the age of 14 it was too late to start learning martial arts, and how long he would retain it depended only on himself. Approaching Miller's ear, Liam quietly told her numb friend that everything was ready. She could transfer her chi energy to him, and he should use the path of the violet dawn. Returning his palm to the fighter's back, everything around was illuminated with red light. Noah's insides seemed to be compressed into one whole, and he himself gritted his teeth from the sudden jolt. Miller looked at his palm, which was glowing with a purple light. The master's hoarse voice sounded over her ear, and she asked how things were going. A purple haze enveloped the guy's entire body. Liam's head fell weakly onto his shoulder. An alien chi was glowing in Noah's stomach. If this is only a quarter of its energy, then how insignificant was what he was able to accumulate over his past life. Drops of sweat flowed down their tense faces. The demoness asked how much energy the mercenary had retained. He answered that half, to which the girl assured that this was not a reason for frustration, because all the rest of the energy would be absorbed along its meridians. Before falling on her back, Vash managed to tell Noah that he should use the path of the violet dawn. And then, through the guy's worried cry, she added that this way he could take all this energy into his body. Miller excitedly bent over the demoness, but she, breathing heavily, assured that it was just fatigue. Noah was silent, looking at his exhausted friend, quietly asked her why do this for his sake. Looking at the ceiling, the girl answered, because they are friends. She asked him not to worry, that nothing was required from Miller, and she just wanted to do it just for her own sake. Slowly raising her finger up, she said that she would now teach Noah one more technique. As promised, the technique of wielding a spear, to which he pulled back in surprise. Was there really a second gift waiting for him? The technique of the Spear King, the bearer of the great spear of the ninth heaven, but with the abilities of a mercenary it will be difficult for him to master it, so the demoness will try to make the technique more primitive. Tiredly rolling her eyes, in response to another cry, she repeated that she was doing this only for herself, and to be more precise, for her first friend in her life, and now she will not allow Noah to die this time, having lived only 13 years. Miller's voice shook with emotion as he said her name. I tried to bow, but immediately received a blow to the jaw from a lying girl. Friends don't bow to each other. Rubbing the bruised area, Noah asked why she got that idea. What's wrong with bowing? The next moment something truly unexpected happened. Liam's hand reached for the guy's neck. She replied that she didn't like to allow such things to happen. Now they were both lying on the pillows next to each other. Noah stared in shock at the demoness, whose hand was still resting on his neck. She suggested with a grin that they should do something more pleasant. The guy seemed paralyzed by what he heard. It seemed that he would lose consciousness from the awkwardness of the situation. But Vash, looking into his eyes, decided to take pity on her friend. She asked to tell Noah about her past life, about what she knew about her then. At that time, the mercenary was barely making ends meet and heard about the heir to the leader of the heavenly cult only through rumors. They said that he was at the very top of Salinas, incomparable in strength. The demoness was delighted and said that it was so, nothing surprising, but Noah asked why she left the city only a month after her appearance. Having heard that nothing was known about her for 3 years, Liam chuckled and continued the story herself. Surely she was traveling then. What she always missed most was freedom. This freedom never existed, always under supervision and within the rules set by the cult leader. Liam looked carefully at Miller. It was then that she met him, her first friend, when at that period of her life she was called into this world. Noah turned to the demoness in bewilderment, but she turned on her back and said that she would leave in a month. But before that, the girl firmly decided to enjoy freedom and this new world. Vash turned to Noah again, propping herself up on her elbow. When in a month he mastered the ninth heaven spear technique, she would leave, as she had done in her previous life. A smile touched her lips. The demoness asked how Noah himself wanted to spend his life. Miller felt uneasy. How would he live his new life? The guy plunged into not the most pleasant memories of his past life. This life was bitter. Broken here he crawls along the floor of the inn, and washes the floors to the screams of the owner. Trembling with horror, he tries to track down his prey, standing with a pathetic club in his hands. She also carries huge bags and someone's things on her thin body. Even at 27 years old, a tall and stately man could not change anything in his life when he wanted to. A weak, worthless, dead insect buried somewhere in the ground. Liam looked at him interestedly, resting her cheek on her hand. But Noah replied that he wanted to live better than last time. Narrowing her eyes, the girl raised one eyebrow. She was not satisfied with the answer. The demoness asked if Noah had any goal. He frowned, not knowing what to answer. Vash smiled and advised him to think about it, and then tell her. She beamed and exclaimed joyfully that she had completely forgotten to ask Noah about his past life. Miller was embarrassed, scratching the back of his head, said that there was nothing special to tell, affectionately called Liam a hooligan when she made fun of him, that she had expected such an answer. Noah thought about his past life. Did he have at least one friend? And immediately answered himself that he definitely did not. Just as he became the first friend in his life of Liam Vash, a girl with a difficult fate who so longed for freedom, it was she who became Noah's first friend in his life, giving him joy and hope for a better future. They spent that long night lying very close to each other on the bed, talking about everything in the world. A month passed, and the friends went to the edge of the city to conduct their last training before separation. Liam beckoned Noah to her, ready to fight. It was time to check how much he had learned in a month. Noah, confidently holding the spear, fixed his gaze on the girl. The time had already come for her departure. After this training she would go wandering. Leaning his body back, he said that he was ready to show the master all his strength. The demoness was surprised for a second. Did he really imagine it differently? Did he think that with his abilities it was possible to fight carelessly? Noah, screaming loudly, ran at that very second, thrusting his spear forward. At the same time, Liam didn't even move. She put her palm forward and showed 2 fingers. The student was given the opportunity to use 20 movements, no more. As he ran, Miller thought about how he could use them more effectively. Previously, Vash had figured out how to simplify the Ninth Heaven Spear technique to Noah's level. She solemnly announced that she called it Improved Ninth Heaven Spear Technique, Noah Miller Style. Noah widened his eyes at this. Was the fighting style really named after him? The girl waved her hair and explained that if she had adapted the technique for him, then why not add the mercenary's name to it? Although Noah did not express great joy at such generosity, it was still stupid to argue. In this improved technique of the Spear of the Ninth Heaven, the demoness combined his technique with some elements of the soul-crushing spear technique. The guy decided for a second whether to use this technique first. So, Movement 1, Improved Technique of the Spear of the Ninth Heaven, Noah Miller Style. Liam's response was a heartbreaking, deadly blow. Without moving, she pointed the palm of her right hand at the approaching spear. A wave of his hand to the left, and the weapon turned in the direction it was pointed to. 1. The demoness, as promised, counted Noah's movements. 2. With her usual grace, Liam threw her head back slightly, and the sharp blade flashed directly above her head. Noah took aim and threw his spear forward. Movement 2. Lightning Splitting Strike. The spear, like an arrow, flew towards the heavenly demoness. 3. Vash raised her palm up again as the weapon flew past her. She said with a smile that compared to the beginning of his training, the guy found the parry block strike movement much easier. Liam switched weapons with Noah. Parry reflects the enemy's attack with an external movement. A block is the result of a downward spinning motion that blocks an opponent's weapon. The girl, with a spear in her hands, showed how to do it correctly, and then a blow, an attack on the enemy. She approached the guy, whose eye was already twitching from tension, and explained that these were the basics of wielding a spear, which he should have known a long time ago. Noah knew, but he taught them on his own, by trial and error. The demoness ordered him not to forget to practice them every day until it became a habit. Miller smiled and thanked his teacher. 4. The girl parried another blow from the spear. 5. And the next one passed her by. 6. The spear whizzed past, and Liam advised Noah to work his back to increase the power of the blow. He gathered his strength and strengthened his military techniques, using the path of the Violet Dawn. 7. The demoness praised the guy. The tip of the spear flew dangerously close to her hand. Noah clenched his teeth. Damn, does she really have such a huge superiority? He had already grown to the second class of martial arts thanks to the chi energy practices that this girl taught him, and she parries his blows with only her right hand. Her level is the highest martial artist. Liam looked closely at her student and asked if he accidentally gave up, because he looked hesitant. Noah lowered his head, gathering his strength. The next moment, the tip of the spear was right in front of the demoness' face. Did she really think that he would give up? A circle of flashes darted around the heavenly demoness, and she looked through them into Noah's eyes. The same flashes were reflected in the mercenary's bloodshot eyes, and barely noticeable veins appeared on his forehead. Liam didn't move a single muscle on her face. She collected and deflected the attack with her palm. Last movement, the girl waved her hand. The tip of the spear stopped right in front of her eyes. A slight smile touched Vash's lips. At the same moment, Noah discovered emptiness in front of him, but what about his technique? A quiet clap, and the feeling of someone's presence behind you. The demoness held the tip of the spear, appearing right behind the mercenary. Both froze. This meant only one thing: lost. Liam touched her friend on the shoulder and said that he was doing a good job, but Miller, embarrassed, asked not to console him, because the master blocked everything with ease, with one hand. Noah was breathing heavily, but despite the limited capabilities of his chi, the girl was sure that he was born for martial arts, and also had good reactions. Noah was able to feel her appear from behind, even though he couldn't even strike. And when you feel something you can't see, that in itself can be called a superpower. One day Miller will take this to such a level that it will give him a significant advantage over others. Vash folded her arms across her chest and set the deadline, in 10 years. Answering Noah's question why exactly 10, the demoness thought about how suspiciously easy their training had been. She was pleased with her student's achievements. He demonstrated everything he had been taught, and she was especially impressed with the last movement. Noah blinked in surprise when Liam asked him to meet in 10 years. The young leader asked Noah if he had decided on his goal, but he shook his head. Vash pointed to herself. If so, then she would become his target. Suddenly the guy's hands began to tremble. A person needs a goal, a person without a goal, as if without a helmsman. The demoness smiled affectionately at Noah. He should set himself the goal of defeating her in battle in 10 years. to which the mercenary barely audibly muttered that he could not. The despair that Miller had been holding back suddenly overflowed. He lowered his head and screamed in shame. Even if he made her his goal, he still couldn't become like her. And how can Liam so easily talk about things that are impossible for him? Noah, who is completely untalented, this is impossible for him. Another thing is Liam, an absolute genius from birth, possessing enormous talent. She probably also had access to elixirs, in addition to a complete lack of understanding of what it was like to be a nobody. This is impossible for a newcomer. But they were unequal from the very moment they arrived in Akron. Liam said quietly that her friend was repeating his complaints again. It was unbearably disgusting for her to see self-flagellation. When the girl added that this is what irritates her about Noah, the guy got seriously angry. She decided not to spare him at all, and continued to say that he was grasping at the failures of his past life, and they were dragging Miller to the bottom. Veins appeared on Noah's neck, and angry words burst out. "Oh, you reptile." Holding out his trembling gloved hands in front of him, he shouted that, having been called to Akron without abilities, he had come here without a coin in his pocket. How Noah risked hunting a boar in slippery mud, and in general, he spent his entire past life on the edge of survival, and in poverty. Liam, folding her arms across her chest, sternly interrupted the flow of evil words, saying that now her friend had learned mystical martial arts from a master, and had also become a second-class fighter in just 3 months. Isn't this a second chance for him? And, by the way, Miller listens to his feelings of inferiority inherited from a past life, worst of all when there is no desire to look for meaning in existence, and not even try to do this. Is it possible that, before new trials, Noah won't even try to cope with them? Because this is a new life and new chances. The warrior's face darkened. He stared at the floor, sharply asking his friend to shut up. She was taken aback, not believing that her friend was angry when he heard this, as if he was offended not by the truthful words themselves, but by the fact that a 13-year-old girl was lecturing him. Looking at the demoness with a furious gaze, Noah hissed that he would make her his target, would practice diligently, but only then, 10 years later, would fight her and plunge a spear into her heart. Liam waved her hand at this, saying, "No need, people die from this, and in general, you shouldn't do that to your friends." After these words, Noah's arrogance quickly subsided. They are friends, and Liam, not paying attention to the outburst of anger, suggested a friendly sparring session. The guy beamed. He felt so bitter and ashamed for his words. Hiding his face in his hands, he almost howled. Liam laughed. Noah was so angry, and now he was completely embarrassed. Approaching her friend, the demoness exclaimed that they would meet in 10 years and do what they had planned. Smiling widely, Liam said that she would be waiting for their fight. Noah, blushing from such closeness, stepped back. To the girl's sarcastic question about butterflies in her stomach, Noah shrugged it off. It's all because the demoness moved closer, and in general, what's the conversation about? She's still a child herself. Liam enjoyed teasing the embarrassed Noah. She again came even closer, and reminded him that he was actually a 27-year-old man with the face of a teenage boy. When the young leader's nose touched the mercenary's cheek, he begged her to move away. Vash chuckled. Since Noah doesn't like her like that, it means that in 10 years, when the demoness turns into a seductive beauty, he will be speechless and will no longer say that she is still a child. Noah Miller set himself 3 goals. The first is to survive, the second is to use all the opportunities missed in his past life. Liam, turning around to say goodbye and clutching a stick with a bag on it in his left hand, smiled. "See you in 10 years. He smiled back and repeated her words. "Okay, see you in 10 years. Vash ordered him to take care of his life. Miller promised that he would definitely do this. Finally, their paths diverged. It was time to go their separate ways. The third goal that Noah set for himself, it was her, his friend and teacher Liam Weish. There are 3 chances that Noah should not miss in this life. One of them has already been fulfilled, surgery to improve the skeleton. He will also need to achieve high skill in the celestial concentration technique. And the last one is to take part in the non-class tournament. Wyoming often hosts various kinds of tournaments, and there's one in which they give the opportunity to participate outside of class. Seeing his opponent, Noah immediately realized that he would be the winner. A clumsy man with an unusual appearance began to taunt the boy, telling him to give up right away, since he himself was a 3rd-level fighter. 10 months have passed since Liam Vaish left, during which time Miller has grown to the first level of proficiency in martial arts. Therefore, victory was given to the newcomer with incredible ease. Among those outside his class, he had no equal. The reward in the tournament was a sacred elixir of strength, which increases the potential of chi energy. Noah took the elixir immediately. It became a huge amplifier for his energy potential, surpassing in quantity even the energy that Liam transferred to him. Now he has everything he wanted from the city of Wyoming, but before he leaves, he must remember to do one more thing. Henry Davis is the same merchant who literally saved his life in the first days of his stay in the city. The man greeted Noah with a wide smile and a loud exclamation. He immediately congratulated Noah on winning the tournament. The guy laughed and thanked Henry. Davis asked why the man had come, and he replied that he wanted to say goodbye. The merchant nodded. He immediately guessed it. Davis wrapped his huge hands around the mercenary's shoulders and cheerfully said that the little classless fighter had achieved everything that could be achieved in Wyoming, and that he was happy for Noah. The guy assured that this was Davis's merit, to which the man gave the warrior a parting word. The outside world is dangerous, but he will certainly cope. The smart always survive, no matter what. He's like that himself. After these words, the merchant handed Noah some small object. Noah, carefully accepting the gift with both hands, exclaimed in shock, an oversized bag. The merchant muttered in embarrassment that it was not new, but it had 1.5 times the capacity that the guy bought from him earlier, and would not go to waste. Miller asked why they were giving him such a valuable thing. The merchant waved him off. You have to take the gift when they give it, especially since this bag can no longer be sold due to its shabby appearance. Davis sat back on the blanket where his goods were laid out, and said that this was a parting gift, and if Noah wanted to repay him so much, let him come back when he became famous, and then pay 100 times more. In addition to this, let him tell everyone that in his youth he owed money to the merchant Davis. Noah, feeling emotional, bit his lip and thanked the man warmly. Having said goodbye to the man, the warrior returned to the tavern where he had rented a room. The old floorboards of the hall creaked under his steps. The innkeeper's daughter Nikki, standing at the bar, noticed the guest and called out. She didn't seem to be in a good mood as she seriously asked the guest about leaving. Noah was surprised and asked how she knew that he would be leaving soon, to which Nikki changed her face in a second and screamed that if only the blind man noticed that the guy had cleaned his room for the first time in a long time. Sitting down on the table, Nikki shook her legs and asked in bewilderment why Miller had cleaned up himself. It was her responsibility. Noah lowered his head and smiled, answering that he knew about it. Nikki said in frustration that aliens from other worlds like Noah would sooner or later leave Wyoming. The guy nodded. That's right, he had to leave. A shadow lay across Nika's beautiful face. Is this really necessary? Suddenly the girl looked at Noah and angrily wished to disappear and die a terrible death somewhere, to which he stared at her in surprise. Nikki's father, Will Hayes, heard these words, and the girl herself suddenly jumped off the table and ran away. Without even noticing her father, who was looking after her in shock, she ran past him, clenching her fists. They both heard a loud slam of the front door. The man, smiling sadly, told the guest not to be offended by his daughter due to her young age. The man nodded, and the innkeeper wondered aloud why he was so mature beyond his years, as if his soul was older than his body. Will took out from somewhere something that at first glance looked like a piece of fabric and handed it to the surprised Miller. It turns out that it was a cloak that the innkeeper himself wore in his youth, as a warrior, and although the cloak itself looked unsightly, it contained the magic of warmth and magic that helped in sword fighting. Noah put on his new clothes and thanked Will, who noticed that the coat was too big for the guy and offered to have it hemmed at the tailor. The man took Noah by the shoulders and looked at the guy carefully, saying that he would go far, being the most capable classless the innkeeper had ever met in his establishment. Tears appeared at the corners of the man's eyes. He wished the victim to take care of himself. After saying goodbye to Will Hayes, the guy walked to the city square. Hearing the loud clatter of boots from somewhere far away, he stopped and listened. Surely someone was running very fast behind him, trying to catch up with Noah. Suddenly someone shouted his name loudly. Noah turned around in surprise, not understanding who could have called him. Behind him, trying to catch her breath from running, stood the innkeeper's daughter. Dripping with sweat, Nikki wiped her wet forehead with her hand and asked Noah to stop. The girl lowered her head and suddenly, in a faltering voice, asked the former guest for forgiveness. The guy, wide-eyed, looked at Nikki incomprehensibly, who tearfully apologized for her cruel wishes of death. Her reddened face was dotted with drops of sweat mixed with tears. She asked Noah not to die. Confused, he asked Nika if she really ran that much just to say this. Tugging at her apron with her hands, the girl regretted that Noah was leaving, and repeated once again that she wanted the warrior to live, and to live long, and if it was hard and unbearable, he could always return to their city. Miller smiled and thanked Nikki. Lowering her head, the girl noticed that no matter how strange it was what she would say now, but one day she looked at Noah with completely different eyes. Squeezing the hem of her skirt between her fingers, she wondered what had happened to her, but at one moment, it seemed to her that the man began to like her. With these words, the girl straightened up and finally looked at him. Then she awkwardly lowered her head again. Noah said he noticed it. He understood that he could not reciprocate, and asked for forgiveness, while Nikki covered her face with her hands, cried, and asked to take care of herself. Miller looked at her one last time and said goodbye. Nikki, already sobbing with all her might, said goodbye through her tears. In a previous life, Noah Miller took 3 years to leave Wyoming, but in this life, it took him only a year. What's strange is that he didn't have any good memories from his past life. But now, remembering the faces of those who helped and supported him all the way, he realized that he received in full the good that he didn't have. The wind carried the words in the air. Take care of yourself. I won't die. Don't be afraid. Maybe someday he will be able to return here. After some time, a priest of the Denali mountain community sat in front of Noah, greeting the guy with the words that he had not met such young adepts for a long time. A tall man, whose suit was entwined with sharp vines with thorns, and whose eyes were covered with white fabric, asked, towering over the guy, what ban does the child want to impose on himself? Having looked at the priest seriously, the warrior decided for himself. In order to return to Wyoming, he needed to become stronger. Liam's smile popped into his head. The girl asked where they would meet in 10 years. And since she doesn't know the geography of this world, he will decide for himself. The guy thought, tapping his fingers on his lips. The choice fell on the city of Memphis. But since the agreed meeting is still 9 years away, where should he go now? There is no need to go to Memphis yet. I didn't want to be hired as a mercenary again, due to the experience of my past life, but I need to somehow hone my skills. Suddenly the guy had an interesting idea. There is the Akron goddess Denali, the goddess of trials and hardships, and there is a mountain named after her. Through the community of priests of this goddess, who lives on Mount Denali, a prohibitory spell can be cast on a part of the body or on one of the senses. This allows a person to greatly increase the effectiveness of his training. Noah looked into the distance. It seems that Mount Denali is somewhere nearby. That's where he'll go. The path ran through trees with dense crowns. Soon he arrived at the mountain, received a ban from one of the priests, and decided to train. 2 bans were imposed on the guy. From then on, a purple glow of an unusual shape, similar to a textured skull, was displayed on certain parts of the body. The first ban is the ban on lightness. With it Miller felt an extraordinary heaviness in everything, in himself, even in his equipment. The oversized bag and ordinary bread felt like an unbearable burden. As for the second ban, Noah took a bite of the bread and began to chew. Suddenly he was nailed to the ground by an incomprehensible force. His eyes widened. The contents of the stomach immediately spilled out onto the ground. Hot tears flowed from the eyes, the sign shone with redoubled force. This was a ban on the sense of taste. Everything that entered the mercenary's mouth felt as if he had swallowed a whole bunch of the most disgusting, stinking, vile bugs and larvae that secrete juice when chewed. Sticking out his tongue, on which the same mark was glowing, the guy tried to catch his breath in order to at least a little drown out the unbearable consequences of lunch. This was the worst thing. It didn't even feel like a loss of taste, Noah thought. Leaning back on the ground, it was a ban on feeling good taste. The texture of food changes and everything he eats feels nauseous. The newly minted adept thought doomedly that now he would not be able to eat or drink with this ban. He did not know that it would be so terrible. The guy suddenly thought, maybe he should send all this. Is it really necessary to suffer like that? You can go to Memphis and become a mercenary there, so you can quickly grow to be class. After all, this is still better than in his previous life. But now he is completely jumping over his head. Everything seemed to float in front of his face, and Liam's upset face appeared to him. No, he can't do that to her, not for his own purpose. The warrior grabbed the ill-fated bread in his hand and began to stuff his mouth with it, like a horde of flies and slugs. While drinking this with water, poor Noah felt a stench in his very nose. His distressed loud sigh echoed across the clearing. Wiping his mouth with his hand, Miller became angry and remembered the goddess Denali with an unkind word. A voice was heard in my ear, "Be silent, little man." The adept froze in fear, not understanding where the voice was coming from. I turned around sharply, but there was no one around, and so the week of his stay on the mountain passed. Noah was hunting for a deer. Slowly and carefully, he tried to sneak up on him with a spear in his hands. A few more steps, trying to crush the branches, and then the guy started running, holding the weapon in front of him. So it seemed to Miller alone. The animal looked blankly at the man frozen next to him. Having come to his senses, the deer, as if mocking, struck with its hooves and rushed away from Noah. The skull on the back glowed, pressing a huge weight on the back. Finally, under the weight of the spear, the adept slowly fell to his knees. All week he ate only bread and water. He needed strength. On Mount Denali you need to survive with the restrictions imposed. Find shelter from the rain. Sew your own clothes. Get food. This is also part of the test. Living here is very difficult. The temperature at night is much lower than during the day, and the predators are fast and strong. Noah crawled under the tree and was now sitting, leaning on the trunk. The ban on lightness makes any movement incredibly clumsy and heavy. And even if the hunt is successful, the ban on taste will not allow him to enjoy the prey. Plans to stay here and train for 2 years gradually came to naught. If the body fails, then what is the use of it? Suddenly a pebble rolled to his feet. Noah slowly raised his head and saw a girl in white clothes. On her neck was the sign of the goddess Denali. She silently waved her hand to the guy. The adept asked the stranger's name, and remembered that on Mount Denali there was a ban on harming each other, so you can calm down. She pointed to her throat, and then she crossed her index fingers together. She couldn't speak. Noah immediately guessed there was a ban on speech, and she couldn't speak, to which the girl nodded. The stranger extended her hand, and a carcass landed at the guy's feet. He recognized the very deer that he had failed to kill. The girl, holding a stick in her hands, bent down to the ground near the adept. Since all aliens from other worlds called to Akron automatically receive knowledge of the Akron language, Noah immediately recognized the local writing. The girl wrote with a stick on the ground that she had been watching the guy for several days and decided to help so that he would not die of hunger. Having thanked him, he was surprised when, having asked the girl what she would require for help, she replied that she did not need anything. Smiling, she pointed at herself with a finger. Kind. Miller met a young hunter who for some reason decided to help him, explaining her action only with her kindness, and now, whenever Noah got into trouble, she was always there to help out. Another time, a girl came with the Denali sign on her right eye. The warrior asked her name. The answer surprised him. It was Ava Collins, a name already familiar to him. In a past life, Noah had heard about a girl who was famous. She was called Lightning for her incredible speed. The guy was surprised not even because he managed to meet a future celebrity. The fact is that Ava Collins will die in 9 years, and she will die in the arms of the little demoness Liam Vash. The rules of Mount Denali were as follows. Adepts impose bans on themselves, then every 6 months a new ban is needed, and adepts are also forbidden to harm each other. Noah sat thoughtfully, leaning on the surface of a large stone. He could not remember where that murder would take place, in some kind of dungeon. Suddenly, Ava's face appeared in front of him. Out of fright, the guy fell to the side, and the girl ran her finger over the stone, and it immediately showed just arrived. Hello. But suddenly he realized that Ava was simply cutting the stone with her finger, and she, without blinking an eye, continued to deduce that she was worried that he was not eating again, and came. The adept thanked and asked why. At such a high level, Ava could not use telepathy to speak. She answered with sadness on her face that telepathy was also part of her speech ban. Suddenly Miller noticed something new in the girl's appearance. Her left hand hung motionless along her body. The warrior explained that 6 months had passed, and she had chosen a new ban on the use of her left hand. Sitting cross-legged, she stretched a flaccid limb and complained that she didn't feel well without her arm. Then she clarified what Noah's prohibitions were. She sympathized with the warrior, said that it must be hard in such a place to be deprived of even the pleasure of food. The guy could only grimace at this, swallowing saliva heavily. Noah suddenly asked Ava what prohibitions other adherents had imposed on themselves. She was surprised by the question, but at the same moment she stood up and promised her new friend to introduce him to the rest of the temporary residents of the mountain. Before the mercenary had time to thank the girl, she, living up to her nickname, disappeared behind the trees. The guy, with his mouth open, could only look at a small receding point in the distance. A few seconds later, Ava appeared in front of him again, apologizing for forgetting about his ban on ease, to which Noah, dumbfounded, said that he wouldn't have been able to keep up with her even without the ban. The girl looked at the guy seriously. With a weighted body, you need to work more on your movement technique. This is now more necessary than wielding a spear. Noah stood up heavily and stood with his knees bent. He realized that Ava had seen his training and asked her to teach him the technique of movement. The girl sympathetically replied that despite her kindness, she could not share her advantage in battle with others. The guy, blushing, awkwardly laughed it off. The next moment, without warning, the warrior threw Noah over her shoulder, as if he weighed nothing at all. The startled adept began to kick back, but Ava explained that he was slow, so they needed to carry him. She did not respond to Miller's pleas to leave him, but simply advised him to hold on tight. For Noah, this walk merged into one whole. They found themselves in a clearing a little larger than the area where Noah was used to being. Someone's voice was heard. Ava was asked who this new guy was. She introduced Miller, but he couldn't help himself and held his nose. Where did this stench come from? In front of him stood a completely dirty, unkempt and foul-smelling girl, the future Archmage Scarlet Parker, with a ban on washing and changing clothes. For some reason she immediately called Noah a moron. A rather elderly man, but still in excellent shape, was sitting on a rock nearby. His age was revealed by his completely gray hair and wrinkles on his downcast face. He good-naturedly invited Noah to compete. It was Jerry Avery, the future Phantom Sword with a blindness in both eyes. Ava, whose inhibitions were her left eye, left hand and voice, explained that only 4 adepts remained on the mountain after 6 months of testing. The rest could not stand it. Noah froze in shock. These people, but all of them will become great masters in the future. While these warriors are little known to anyone, the fame of their skill will spread throughout Akron. The wind blew a heavy smell of sewage in his direction. Noah pinched his nose. Scarlet turned to him, asking about prohibitions. Barely breathing, the guy answered her. The girl, grimacing, said that since he immediately took 2 bans, and even voluntarily, then he definitely wouldn't last long here. Jerry's voice was heard. He, leaning on his sword, interrupted Scarlet, saying that Noah came here to gain strength, and there is nothing to be surprised that the warrior decided to complicate his life. Miller set himself the goal of overcoming himself at any cost. Noah was stunned. How could a man know about this? Someone from the outside said that the old man often instills fear out of the blue, but Jerry said heavily that different people gather on this mountain, and after 6 months only the 4 of them remained. The old man said that he would look after Noah. He wondered how long he would last. Parker turned to Ava, dismissively calling her dumb, saying that she was probably glad to see another eccentric who had taken 2 prohibitions for himself from the very beginning of his journey. Ava turned to Noah, who was surprised by what was happening, writing that since he had already met everyone, it was time to go back. The guy asked where the 4th adept was that everyone was talking about. Jerry spoke up. He did not advise Noah to get acquainted with Casper. Fixing his blind gaze into the distance, the old man said that he was dangerous. Scarlet silently looked at the man with alarm. Noah stood there and didn't understand what all this meant. For months have passed since Noah arrived on the mountain. As soon as he got used to the prohibitions, they became worse. His body became even heavier, and the taste of food became more disgusting. But still, as he spent his days training, he felt himself getting stronger. After 4 months of training, he upgraded the Violet Dawn path to 3 stars and improved the 9th Heaven Spear technique, his signature style, to 2 stars. Despite the low-class skeletal enhancement surgery, it still accelerated his growth in martial arts. Life on the mountain was full of difficulties, but the rewards were worth the effort. During the day, Noah used the improved nominal technique of the Spear of the Ninth Sky, and at night, the path of the Violet Dawn. The heaviness of his body and the nauseating taste of food did not leave the guy. But all this was not in vain. Bones seemed to strive to break with every step, and muscles almost tear when training with a spear. He must endure everything, for Liam's sake. Noah has set himself such a goal, and will go towards it, no matter what happens. Stopping, he looked at himself. After all, during this time Noah had grown, and even his clothes had become too small for him. In the silence of the forest, a young voice was heard. Miller turned around, putting his spear forward. The stranger said that the guy was good with a spear, The blue-haired boy was sitting on a rock nearby. Looking at Noah, he said that he was glad to meet you, and that he had never met him here before. With a wide smile on his face, the stranger introduced himself. It was Casper, and this was the first time he had met someone his own age here. Noah clenched his teeth, remembering what the other adepts had warned him about. Casper looked him straight in the eyes mockingly. Earlier, Scarlet, playing with a magic light with her index finger, irritably asked if Noah had met a real genius along the way. Jerry said that while they were working hard and fighting on the verge of despair, this boy moves forward with incredible speed, and looks at them, grinning. Such is the extent of his talents. Ava also worriedly warned him not to look for a meeting with Casper, otherwise the guy may despair. The mercenary was still silent, gloomily watching the adept. He looked into his new acquaintance's eyes with interest, asking why he was so tense. Casper simply asked his name, to which Noah became embarrassed and introduced himself. Casper chuckled. He guessed that they had already told him about him, and that the guy could look for him and get to know him. After all, they were the same age. Noah muttered irritably that he needed to train and turned around to leave, the smile fading from Casper's face. The mercenary thought angrily about what kind of genius he was, because he had lived with a real genius for a whole year, Liam. As Noah left, he decided that he would not waste his time on this simpleton. Casper followed him and asked him what the name of his training was, Miller, and rolled his eyes. Is it really not clear? With the spear, Noah discovered that the weapon had simply disappeared from his hands. Turning around sharply, he saw Casper a few meters away from him with his spear in his hands. He said that he had never trained with a spear before. The boy looked at the stolen goods with interest. Miller stood with his mouth open. The greatest humiliation for a warrior is to be deprived of his weapon. But instead of rage, he was overcome with surprise. Casper, not letting go of someone else's weapon, sincerely did not understand why Noah was looking at him like that. He just borrowed a spear, tried it a little and immediately returned it. Twisting the spear in his hand, he mockingly said that he would repeat his techniques. How is it? Oh yes, the improved technique of the ninth heaven spear, Noah Miller style. Casper jumped into the air, stance 2 lightning fast splitting strike. The next moment he was on his feet, and on the ground lay many tops of trees cut off by a sharp blade. Smiling triumphantly, he said that this was a good technique for the spear. Noah, completely dumbfounded by what he saw, thought that Casper not only repeated the technique the first time, but also improved it. But could Liam repeat this? Casper broke into a grin, and then he said that he clearly did a better job than the owner of the spear himself. All the mercenaries' admiration immediately faded away. Casper walked imposingly around the clearing, arguing that he didn't understand why everyone came here to train, because he could copy any of the adepts and do everything much better. With sadness in his voice, the boy turned to Noah and asked in frustration why no one could be like him. Why do these people continue to train even though they will never reach his level? The interlocutor was silent, boiling with anger. Casper, offendedly listing the adherents, kept saying that they were angry at his words. But sword control, movement techniques, magic, he can do all this better than them. Why does everything turn out this way? For a mercenary, other adepts are even now shining examples of skill. However, there is a real genius here that outshines them. Noah thought about Liam, and imagined him and Casper on the top of the mountain. How should he, an ordinary person, treat them? Miller feels different around Casper than she does around Liam Weish, because she openly talks about her genius, but never belittles him with her superiority. But this bastard, he asks about the prohibitions of a mercenary. But Miller understood that the boy knew perfectly well how ordinary people perceived him and reveled in his superiority over others. Casper joyfully shouted to the departing adept that if he talks about his prohibitions, he will find out about his own, to which Noah indifferently replied that he is not interested, because Casper's most obvious prohibition is the prohibition on modesty. The boy, without losing the happy notes in his voice, asked Miller where he was going and whether he wanted to pick up his spear. Noah turned around and ran up to Casper. He shouted right in his face that he didn't need a weapon, and in general, let Casper never approach him again. But the boy was not offended at all. He said with a smile that he had not done anything wrong, and did not understand why Noah reacted so aggressively. Why is a mercenary stuck on this mountain anyway? Let him go down. With his skills he can make a good living. Miller, completely losing control, tried to attack Casper with his fists. But I came across an invisible wall with my hand. The boy calmly reminded him that there was a prohibition against harming each other. He also said, pushing Noah's palm away, that he was a weakling. What was he thinking when he tried to hit the adept? Casper held the hand of the struggling Noah and asked if he got into a fight because he realized that he would not be able to answer thanks to the ban. How hard life is when you have to constantly restrain your anger. Casper did not let up. He said that he knew about all the gossip that was going on behind his back, and that others were avoiding him. The figure of Ava grew behind him, and the next moment Casper smiled unctuously at her. Giving the spear to the owner, he turned to the girl, calling her older sister, and said that the mercenary was to blame for everything. Ava was silent, watching the couple with a heavy gaze. Casper cheerfully praised the other adept's technique, but did not forget to mention that he performed it clumsily. Miller, gritting his teeth, clutched a spear in his hands. Casper continued that the higher the level of the technique, the more difficult it is in practice, and with Noah's meager abilities, he would not reach this technique even to 6 stars. Casper said that the more difficult the test he takes on during his stay on this mountain, the better the gifts that the goddess Denali, the goddess of trials, will shower on him. The more he complicates his stay here, the faster he will achieve perfection. He wanted to say something else, but suddenly Ava covered the boy's mouth with her right hand. Noah watched their silent exchange in silence. Finally, Casper managed to stick out his tongue and remove Ava's hand from his mouth. At that moment, Miller turned around and ran away with all his might. Ava, with her mouth open, tried to call him, but she immediately raised her hand to her throat, which was burning like fire with the bright Denali mark on it. She, breathing heavily, just silently watched as Noah quickly disappeared. Talent, 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 this word was beating like a moth in Miller's head. He clenched his teeth until he bit his lower lip until it bled and remembered Denali again. Finally, raising his head to the sky, he shouted the name of the goddess with all his might. Tears blurred his eyes, blood flowed in small streams from his wounded lip, and behind him again he heard the same voice that addressed him. Noah himself did not notice how he squeezed the handle of the spear until it bled, asking the goddess for a new ban. First, a void appeared, then 3-dimensional symbols, dots, and a huge boulder appeared in its place. Noah, licking the dried blood on his lips, asked into nothingness where he was. A silhouette appeared in front of him, shining with a purple light. The face was hidden behind dark long hair. The figure was dressed in a ragged outfit, which was surrounded by vines with thorns. Noah stepped back in surprise. Coming closer to Miller, the stranger answered his question. This was her abode. Denali, that was her name. The goddess was delighted at the appearance of a mortal. The guy quickly wiped away the remaining blood and tears on his face with his sleeve, at first not believing what he saw. Shaking her knees, the goddess sat in the air. She heard Noah's exclamation, and ordered her no longer to anger her with abusive addresses. She would not tolerate this anymore. Denali looked at the mortal with interest, because he so zealously asked her for a new ban. The goddess listed the prohibitions that Noah already had. Taste, lightness, all these burdens, she said, are unbearable, and yet the mortal needed new ones so much. The adept quietly said that he would withstand everything, to which Denali laughed. The goddess stunned Noah with knowledge about his past, because he, returned from the clutches of death, also dares to be brave in front of her. The warrior exclaimed in his heart, how does she know? At that moment the eyes and mark on Denali's forehead lit up with a bright purple light. The eyes of the goddess see everything. Human life is short, and this rule cannot be broken. But those who violate are called gods. But Noah Miller, he is not a god, and at the same time he is a violator of the rules of the universe. He died, and then returned to the past, and lives again. Denali, having fun, turned over in the air and was now hanging upside down. Noah asked if breaking these rules hurt him. The goddess replied, drawing a thread in the air, that everything that exists has a beginning and an end, and that a mortal, bypassing this, challenged death, which means his soul will pay a great price for this. But not during life. Torment will overtake the soul after death. Hundreds, millions of hours of torment. Denali laughed. These words scared Miller a lot at first. Then he thought, narrowing his eyes, what difference does it make what happens after death? The adept returned to the mountain, and now Ava towered over him, angrily looking the guy up and down. He sat under a tree, hugging himself with his arms. Had he really added new prohibitions? Noah looked up at the girl with sick eyes. Is she worried about him? Ava frowned even more after these words. She sighed and asked with a glance what specific prohibitions had been added. Hearing the answer, the girl was stunned. Warmth and a peaceful sleep. The mercenary has gone crazy, because prohibitions on feelings and emotional comfort are the worst. The ban on feeling heat meant that Noah Miller could no longer keep warm, and even next to the fire he was constantly shivering from the cold. And the ban on restful sleep is probably one of the most painful. He made sure that all the memories of his life on Earth, about his parents, fears, insecurities, from now on, all this came to him during sleep and deprived him of peace. Sleep was no longer a refuge from worries. The guy lost peace and a sense of satisfaction from sleep. Ava sadly stated the fact. Noah was a real idiot. The girl could not restrain herself and indignantly told the adept, swinging her stick on the ground, what was he thinking about? Because with his inclinations he would soon achieve everything. Miller answered exhaustedly that he never had and does not have any inclinations or talents. Lowering his hands, he again repeated that he did not possess any of the above. Ava looked at the guy in confusion. It couldn't be, although, looking at his achievements, and with the prohibitions that he had previously imposed, for some reason his growth still did not accelerate. With so many skills, it seems like he was truly born untalented. Who is he? Noah needed to achieve his goal, but he couldn't do it with talent alone. Looking angrily at Ava, he said that he ran to take the bands not only after communicating with Casper, he simply showed him the next step towards his goal. An adept who was deprived of inclinations needs to reach the level of talented people. For this he must do the impossible. Miller leaned back against the tree trunk again, clenching his fists. Both he and Ava were silent. The girl looked attentively at the guy. The same one stared at one point known only to him, as if he had forgotten about the existence of the warrior. Finally, Ava smiled briefly. She squatted down in front of Noah, looking encouragingly into his eyes. It looked like he had set a high goal for himself. She said that she could understand him, because the girl also set herself the goal of becoming the strongest in the world. Noah raised his eyes and looked at her in surprise. Ava asked if he remembered asking him to teach him the technique of movement, to which Miller again laughed it off, blushing. Ava nodded and said that she would teach him. Taking something out of her bosom, she placed the object right under Noah's feet, a secret manuscript. An unprepossessing-looking notebook. It contained a description of martial art, both a mystical teaching and a movement technique. Everything you need to know to develop the technique of the flight of the soul without a shadow movement. Noah immediately opened the notebook. Incredible, this high art is comparable to the path of the violet dawn and the spear of the ninth heaven. But why did Ava give such a treasure to him? The girl shrugged. If her friend dies from difficulties on this mountain, she will be powerless. But she does not think that the guy will give up. Ava sat down next to her, asking to call her big sister, and also, looking thoughtfully to the side, suggested that she liked Noah. He perked up at the words he saw, and the girl looked at him slyly. She laughed at her thoughts and added that maybe it was just because she was kind, to which Noah exclaimed that she was simply mocking him. System notification: you have learned the soul flight without shadow technique. The Violet Dawn skills have been upgraded to 3 stars. The improved signature technique of the ninth heaven spear is 2 stars. The durable skeleton that breaks iron, the Stonebreaker strike, is 8 stars. The lightning leap technique is 6 stars. Noah Miller, thanks to the sleep ban, was tormented by nightmares. There he saw himself 10 years later, in a friendly sparring match with Liam Vash. He rushed forward using the signature improved technique of the ninth heaven spear. Move 1, a heartbreaking killing blow. Liam, as always, clearly parried the blows with her palm with amazing speed. Miller, gritting his teeth, continued the fight, but the demoness, her eyes sparkling, did not allow him to exhale. The 5th movement is a deadly flash. Noah again rushed forward with a spear. The eyes turned red from tension, the blade flew, cutting through the air. Liam seemed to be just waiting for this. A moment, and her hand smashes the spear into pieces, at the same time crushing Noah's arms into pieces right up to his forearms. The mercenary is desperately trying to understand what happened. The words are being hammered into my head with a sledgehammer. Is this all he has achieved in 10 years? The adept stands opposite Liam. With her head bowed low, she scolds him like a boy. She regretted that she even undertook to teach such a mediocre martial arts. A whole 10 years of effort and diligence, all in vain. He doesn't need to do this anymore. Liam's hand touches the guy's stomach. She draws in energy with her palm, takes away everything she taught, and he won't see the demoness again. Blood spews from his stomach. Liam says that he will destroy his area of chi concentration. This is the end of his martial arts training. She says goodbye and leaves. Noah screams her name, begs her to stop, tries to reach with the stumps of her hands, but all in vain. Miller screams in insane fear. His face is covered in his own blood. He begs her not to leave, because he can still become a real warrior. With a loud, panicked gasp, Noah wakes up. Clutching his heart, he breathes raggedly and clears his throat from the nightmare that is still choking him. The victim looks at his gloved palms and realizes that this is just a dream. How good? His thoughts are interrupted by the question of who Liam Vash is. Along with the voice comes a terrible stench. Noah's hair stands on end, and Scarlett giggles disgustingly. Who is she? If this is Noah's girlfriend, then they are still naughty. She is probably still a child too. The girl leans closer, saying that the bird sang to her about Noah's additional prohibitions. But all the guy can think about at this second is what a disgusting smell around. Scarlett lifts the guy's upper eyelid and pulls it towards her, saying that he really took the ban on restful sleep. He's a complete fool. Along with the terrible smell, words reach Noah that he is not a tenant, because he has also taken a ban on heat, all the most difficult things. Suddenly, Noah shrugs it off and vomits the contents of his stomach. Scarlett is perplexed, but Jerry, who has just approached, explains that this is a consequence of her close presence. She indignantly says that she just came to support the guy, to which the old warrior asks her not to turn to him. Scarlett, the future Archmage, and Jerry Avery, the ghost sword. Noah wipes his mouth with his sleeve, apologizing for what happened, why they came. Scarlett replied to help him. She said that the mute woman, holding her nose, how disrespectful, really asked them about this. Noah looked at them with all his eyes. Big sister. Scarlett was holding in her hands several scrolls wrapped in red ribbon. She had bought magic scrolls for the guy. Miller, again, unable to bear the close contact with the girl, closed his mouth. But she seemed not to notice and kept babbling about the fact that aliens from other worlds, which they were, could study magic through reading scrolls. It was very convenient. She offered to briefly talk about magic, and old Jerry sighed sympathetically. Holding a sword in his hands, the man expressed hope that Noah would be able to practice at least a little. The guy, all gray with malaise, still walked towards Jerry with a spear in his hand. He would try. Finally, they approached each other. Scarlett taught Noah 4 spells. The first is Clearing the Mind. The adept brought 2 fingers to his temple. This spell cleanses the mental field, polluted and confused by nightmares. The guy's gaze has become clearer. The second spell, a simple one, will make him stronger and faster. Noah said 2 words out loud. Orange flashes appeared around him. It slightly alleviates the effects of his ban on lightness. After that, a sword and a spear collided in the air with a loud clang. It seemed like sunset was approaching, judging by the sky. Noah lay on the ground, arms and legs spread out in different directions, breathing heavily after the fight. The third spell is to restore stamina. The victim put his hand to his chest, and it shone with a blue glow. This spell helps when you are exhausted, but it should not be abused. You can take away so much vital energy that you are not far from death. The exhausted guy thought that he needed to use the stamina recovery, otherwise he would not be able to withstand the hellish pace of training. Exhaling, Jerry lowered his eyes next to where Noah was sitting. He said in frustration that the boy again could not stand even 100 seconds of training against a blind old man with a sword, to which the defeated Miller promised that next time he would stand more. Suddenly, the mark near his heart began to glow, and Noah's insides curled into a ball, as if he had been plunged into a vat of ice water and was not allowed to get out. Jerry heard the clicking of teeth against each other, and he realized that the warrior was shivering again from the cold. He approached the guy and with his index finger began to quickly press on some known points on his chest. He immediately felt a growing warmth throughout his body. Noah lowered his head and stopped shaking when Jerry asked if it was better. The mercenary nodded and thanked him. Jerry Avery pressed on the blood vessels, and this stimulated the metabolic processes, thereby helping to alleviate the inhibition of the sensation of heat. Enjoying the warmth in his body, Noah looked at the man blearily. He said goodbye and wished the boy to take care of himself, because besides him, the old man had no one to even train with. Breathing heavily, the adept realized that without his help he would not have survived. Several hours passed. Miller stretched out on the ground and looked at the sunset sky. He got a chance to live his life again, and so many people helped him. Something didn't add up in his head. Noah suddenly felt surprised. He even sat down abruptly on the ground, rubbing his forehead. The guy thought, "It can't be, Is it possible that what he was thinking about now could be real? Why did people become so kind to him after his return? Because in the Akron of his past there was no place for compassion between people. Meanwhile, Scarlet called out to Jerry, and he replied that he noticed her presence from afar. She growled and promised that as soon as she returned from the mountain, she would burn him like a match. Just think, I haven't washed for several days. Who doesn't? The man did not raise an eyebrow at this. Then Scarlet asked if he trained with Noah. Jerry replied that the boy was making progress day by day, despite the severity of the movements. The girl looked slyly at the old man. Why is he trying so hard for Noah? He's only interested in martial arts. But he replied that he was asked for this, and Parker, moreover, made the scrolls for him herself. Jerry raised an eyebrow in confusion, but Scarlet remained silent. She didn't know why, but at every meeting with Noah she simply could not remain indifferent. On a completely different spiritual level, the figure of the guy, invisible to others and himself, was accompanied by a violet glow. But the mercenary did not believe in gifts of fate. Why complicate everything? He was just lucky, that's all. And now a whole 6 months have passed on Mount Denali. A trembling hand gripped the handle of the spear with force. Noah lunged forward and almost dropped to one knee. The weight of prohibitions was constantly and palpably pinning him to the ground. A silent scream escaped from his throat. The adept still could not stand it, and fell to his knees. The spear slipped out of his hand and landed nearby with a dull thud. Drops of sweat flowed from his forehead, tickling the tip of his nose. The mercenary breathed heavily, hanging his head low. Someone's footsteps were heard and Noah looked up sharply. Casper towered over him with a mocking smile. He greeted the adept, derogatingly calling him a maggot. With a smile, he told how he doubted that Noah would last 6 months. But a whole year has already passed, and he is still in service. Turning away, the guy began to slowly rise to his feet, grabbing a spear from the ground. Casper ran around him. Looking into his face, he asked in frustration why Noah was silent. They hadn't seen each other for so long. Taking a closer look, Casper noticed the symbol of the goddess on his neck. Groaning, the boy realized that this adept had taken a voice ban. Casper laughed, saying that Noah chose the most convenient one in these mountains. There's really no one to talk to. The blue-haired prankster jumped out in front of Noah again, teasing him with words that these were the easiest prohibitions, that the guy was too weak. The next moment the mercenary interrupted him. Holding a spear, he rushed across Casper with great speed. Casper carefully watched the adept with his eyes alone. Still, Noah has changed beyond recognition over these 6 months. His movements are precise and impeccable. He even honed to perfection the movements that Ava taught him. Casper bowed his head thoughtfully. It seems that even a larva can crawl far if it is done for a long time and decisively. The boy smiled. Is this really all that Noah is capable of, even with 5 prohibitions? He stopped abruptly, breathing heavily with his mouth open. Casper looked around, measuring him up and down. The next moment he found himself next to Miller, and grabbed the handle of someone else's spear. All wet from the sweat pouring into his eyes, the mercenary looked straight. Casper asked him why he was ignoring his presence. The lack of a voice is not an excuse. The guy's face and lips speak for him. Noah, tired of the company of the annoying boy, quickly wrote on the ground, "Listen, you have nothing to do." Casper's gaze became clouded. He said in a quiet but dangerous voice that this would not work. Only he could afford to be arrogant with an adept, but not the other way around. Noah chuckled. What will Casper do? He himself talked about the ban on violence. He won't kill him. With a sharp and precise movement, the blue-haired man snatched the spear from the mercenary's hands, and the next moment he pushed Noah to the ground with the handle of his weapon. He laughed madly. What a pathetic sight, the adept crawling on the ground like a larva. This is how, Noah thought, with a trail of blood streaming from his nose from the fall, you can cause indirect damage. Casper looked with contempt at the lying adept, raised his free hand to the blade of the spear, and it lit up with a bright blue glow. The boy, with a mockery in his voice, said that Noah was not even capable of this. The mercenary understood this was the chi of the weapon, as can be done by masters of the highest martial arts who have such control over their chi energy that they can fill the weapon with it, increasing its lethality. Casper stuck his spear into the tree trunk. How long will Miller last here? Because even if he trains until he is very old, he will not reach the level of the blue-haired one. The world is unfair. While the adept crawls with sweat and blood to the top, Casper easily runs there. Especially since Noah receives nothing for his efforts. What is the point of this? Will he really continue to try? The guy wiped his bloody nose with his sleeve and stubbornly said what would happen. The blue-haired man stared at the mercenary in surprise. He was amazed at what Noah said. One can despair and lament that the adept does not have a single drop of innate talent. Moreover, the guy even thanked him for the company. Although his achievements are ridiculous for Casper, Miller can work hard and consistently, unlike geniuses like the boy. No matter how much Noah has to crawl like a larva, he will continue. So let Casper continue to laugh. The time will come when the spear of the adept will pierce him, and then there will be no time for laughter. There was silence. Casper did not take his eyes off Noah. He easily pulled the spear out of the wood. The hole from the weapon was filled with blue light. He chuckled thoughtfully, holding his spear in the air. He looked at the guy differently. It seems that something is really starting to change. Casper said that he is interested, and that he will really look forward to this day. But if Miller gives up and starts crying, he immediately said, "Don't get your hopes up." A month later, the date came for Noah Miller to spend a year as an adept on Mount Denali, and he had to choose a new ban. Noah has matured noticeably over the year, but he has also grown haggard from his inhibitions and demanded a new one, hearing. This ban was one of the most painful. From now on, his ears were constantly filled with terrible noise, to which it was impossible to get used to. 6 prohibitions, and every day Noah Miller spent on the edge of survival. And yet his hands did not tremble when he fought with a spear. Block, he moves the spear back with the blade. Hold, moves him forward. And strike, attacks the enemy with such force that flashes appear in the eyes. He meditates, develops the improved 9th spear name technique, the path of the violet dawn, and the shadowless soul flight technique. Trains tirelessly with Jerry Avery. Ava Collins tries to keep up with the lightning. And Scarlet, well, actually, Scarlet is out of business. The stronger Noah Miller became, the heavier his body became, the more disgusting his food tasted, and the worse his nightmares became. It was incredibly cold, and there was a constant, unbearable noise in my ears. But sometimes all this even helped and distracted constructively. And in those moments when Casper came and bothered me with his annoying boasting, slowly, like a larva, Noah Miller developed. One day a guy was blasphemously pulled out of his meditations. He opened his eyes and was stunned. Abode of Denali. But why did she call him? After all, not even 6 months have passed. He should not at a ban. The goddess looked into his eyes and congratulated him on the fact that adept Noah Miller had passed the path of her trials. Noah leaned forward. What tests? What is she talking about? Casper appeared in front of his face and loudly said that he would explain everything now. Now there were 2 people standing in front of the guy Casper and a little behind Denali. The goddess explained to the shocked adept that Casper's very existence was a test. Noah shuddered. So that's what it's all about. Ava Collins, Scarlett Parker, Jerry Avery, they all later became famous in Akron after being tested on this mountain. But the mercenary had never heard of any Casper, because thanks to his talent, he would have come out of this mountain even more famous than the rest. Noah suspected that something was wrong with the boy, but he could not even imagine that he was not real. Casper jumped up to the guy with a cheerful smile. The whole point of his existence was to drive adherents to despair with his achievements. Even those who were very gifted despaired when they saw how easily everything came to him. Casper looked devotedly into Noah's eyes and said that while the others tried to avoid him and turned up their noses, Noah, despite his lack of talent, did not turn away from the blue-haired man. On the contrary, I made it my motivation. Yes, the mercenary took on even more difficulties. It was not the best decision, but Casper never managed to make him despair. As if it were a single organism, the voice of Casper and Denali swept over the monastery. I liked your recklessness. Miller looked at them with wide eyes. Denali smiled and said that this was the end of the conversation, and that Miller should not tell the other adepts who Casper really was, otherwise he would incur the wrath of the goddess. She asked Noah if he wanted to continue his path of testing. The guy seriously replied that there could be no doubt. The reward will be waiting for him when the adept leaves Mount Denali. Suddenly, the goddess smiled insidiously and offered Noah a power that could not be achieved even after 100 years of cultivation, in exchange for his soul. But the guy, perked up, shouted that he did not need such deals. Denali broke into a smile again, showing sharp fangs. Does this mean Noah will work and slowly crawl towards the goal? He was dumbfounded and froze, rooted to the spot. The guy hated the word work so much, because the starting point is different for everyone, and no matter how hard he worked, he could not keep up with the talented. But talented people must also work. Noah hated those who, regardless of the inclinations and initial conditions of a person, said that one simply should not be lazy and work on oneself. But putting aside sentiments, he also really wanted to work. Miller spent his past life feeling sorry for himself, using his lack of talent as an excuse. Therefore, he always remained in place and achieved nothing. What is his new life like? Lots of fateful meetings, and no more excuses or indulgences for yourself. Breaking away from the comfort of excuses, he had no choice but to move forward. Only in this life he truly works, overcoming himself. Noah, grinning, firmly told the goddess that he would crawl until the very end. In this life he fell in love with the word work. Denali turned around with a smile, leaving the surprised adept behind, and, as if, began to conduct a monologue. There are no coincidences in Akron. Everything has a reason and a beginning. Akron summons aliens from other worlds, and they are given advantages in the form of skills. Who knows why, and what is the reason for this? Noah didn't understand who Denali was telling this to, because she said she would talk to herself, but she was definitely telling him all this. Is she really saying something that he shouldn't know, and therefore talking about it as if indirectly? But why? Suddenly the tone of her voice changed dramatically. Noah's return means that someone or something wants him back and something incredible is about to happen. Since the mercenary has returned to the past, let him be ready for the reason why he was given a second chance. Space somewhere far above them was burning with 1,000 celestial bodies. Denali turned around with a smile, and said that was all. Suddenly she seemed to feel something from outside. The sky became covered with a network of cracks. Denali raised her hand and ordered someone, visible only to her, to stop immediately. She put out her palm and loudly asked to retreat, otherwise she would destroy this entity. The hole in the sky began to slowly close, and the cracks gradually disappeared. Finally, in front of a surprised Noah, everything returned to its previous state. Denali ordered him to return immediately. She said that the adept had little time, and he needed to continue training. She waved her hand, and Noah's scream disappeared into the air, followed by himself. The goddess thought, slowly lowering her hand. Will he be able to stop the end of the world? 2 days later, Noah took the 6th prohibition, the smell prohibition. The stench from Scarlett's hair constantly irritated his nose. He sat by the cave, looking down, and then he felt Ava's presence. Now it was as if they understood each other without writing or words. She asked if he was sure that he had chosen the appropriate prohibition. Noah smiled faintly. The worse the ban, the greater the reward. He felt a little nauseous when swallowing saliva, but otherwise it was tolerable. In addition to those already known, Ava Collins now had restrictions on taste and hearing, and this caused her great suffering. Now it was much harder for her than with the previous bans. The exhausted girl only now realized what Noah had gone through. He chuckled when he heard that taking away feelings is terrible. He became serious when Ava turned to him. She wanted to say something. Soon his named elder sister will leave this mountain. Both stood opposite each other, not moving. Ava looked at the boy sympathetically with sisterly concern. He looked back attentively and excitedly. In fact, for Ava Collins, the trials of the Denali Mountains were unnecessary. Her talent already eclipsed everyone. The girl underwent testing for 2 years. Noah was sure that she had already achieved all her goals. And so, Ava finally decided to leave. She asked the adept about his plans, but the mercenary decided to stay. The girl lowered her eyes sadly. Now Noah looked down at Ava, asking if they would meet again. The girl replied that she would definitely, she was sure of it. No matter how sad she was, she found the strength to smile at the guy. The warriors suddenly noticed how Noah had grown up, and it turns out they had known each other for a whole year. Her eyebrows frowned in concern. If she left, he might die, and he might not be able to bear a few more prohibitions. Biting her lip, Ava regretted that she never taught Noah the full mastery of soul flight without a shadow. Maybe she should stay. Suddenly the guy raised his head and smiled at her. He could handle it. Thanks to Ava, he lasted so long. And now he will be able to cope with difficulties on his own. She does not need to change plans just because of him. Ava was surprised by his words. Noah sincerely thanked her for everything, including saving his life. The girl smiled warmly at Miller, and the next second she pressed herself tightly to him, running her fingers into his overgrown hair. Then she lowered her right hand to Noah's shoulder, and hugged the amazed guy as tightly as she could. At first the mercenary blushed deeply, and was already thinking about breaking away. But then he calmed down and meekly accepted this impulse. They stood like that for a little while, just the two of them. Life continued to go, in the singing of birds, entangled by the wind in the dense trees of the mountain. Ava finally let go of Noah and took a dumbfounded step back. She said she knew he could handle it. The boy was one of the strongest people she had met in her life. She thought so because Miller never gave up. Noah assured that it was not true, that he fell into despair again and again, but that he somehow managed to get up and move on. Ava assured that this was his strength, because she could not stand it when she encountered Casper. Once again, as a farewell, she called Noah her little brother, and she ordered me to take care of myself and not die. But he answered with a smile that he would never die. Ava Collins soon left. Scarlett Parker and Jerry Avery also left the mountain, leaving the adept completely alone. And he was really very unaccustomed to the feeling of loneliness. Noah remembered how he was before he met anyone. The boy did not trust anyone. But now he realized that a person cannot exist alone. If it weren't for all those he met on his way to his new life, Miller would have died. Raising his head to the sky, the man was amazed. Something in his heart had changed. The invisible wall fell. A blissful smile appeared on his face. For a short moment, he no longer felt either heaviness or stench, or heard any noise. The feeling of freedom was fleeting, but it seemed like it lasted forever. The usual views suddenly changed, and it is clear why he, as such, no longer existed. Noah became different, and the world around him changed after him. Summer came. The singing of cicadas was heard everywhere. 7 years later, Liam Vash will meet Ava Collins in the dungeon and kill her, and Noah must save his sister from this death. The guy was so lost in thought that he threw his spear at the tree. It landed at a sharp angle just a centimeter from the cicada. The bug quickly flew away. Noah looked after it. Cicada larvae lie in the ground for 10 years before developing into adult cicadas, and Noah only has 7 years to prevent this killing. 7 years, I wonder what he can achieve. The mature teenager smiled. No, he can do it, period. Although every day brought new achievements, this was not enough for Noah Miller. While wielding a spear, he tried to increase the intensity over and over again, cutting down his hours of sleep, using this time to train with weapons. One day he asked Jerry how he navigated without sight. The old man replied that you just need to focus on other senses and remember the environment well. The next ban was the ban on vision. Since the ban was passed, the world has been plunged into darkness. The only thing Noah Miller had to rely on was touch. A week later he was able to move around a little. His hearing did not help him in this dark world, because he was still filled with deafening sounds. One day the noise began to resemble the singing of cicadas, and in the flow of this singing the adept forgot about the passage of time. He simply continued to work with the spear. His body was used to performing techniques automatically, and Noah could devote more time to thinking. If he is a larva, then what would he like to become? Maybe a cicada, which, when it comes to the surface while still a larva, first sings and then becomes a cicada. Noah, tormented by prohibitions, clenched his teeth and stubbornly moved on. What did he want to become? Why did he return? Summer passed. The guy began to feel that he was getting colder, but his routine remained the same. The hitman was simply training with a spear. Season after season, Miller became accustomed to a world full of darkness. But the moment came when the adept appeared before the goddess, already quite an adult, handsome and strong from endless training, but with tattered clothes hanging on him. Noah said that he wanted to complete the tests. At that moment, all the marks of prohibition on his body dissipated. Noah, with a clear gaze, not feeling any noise or pain, looked down, examining his hand. Denali asked how he felt again after such a long ordeal. Miller replied that it was always nice to get rid of a burden. The eyes can see again. There is no longer a stench in the nose. There are no deafening noises in the ears. And the body is light as a feather without constant frost on the skin. This is real freedom. The goddess rubbed her temple and chuckled. She wondered what reward Noah deserved. He spent 3 long years on her mountain and endured difficult trials. Throughout the life of Denali, there have been students who took on an unbearable number of prohibitions, and it ended sadly. They either left or died. The goddess was glad to have a student like him, and wished for the same for herself. She sincerely wanted to bring him the best of gifts for his efforts. So she asked Noah what he wanted. The guy perked up and immediately asked for martial arts ability, but Denali replied that she couldn't give it to him. Then the adept thought deeply. After all, he has a goal. To achieve it he should not waste his time on trifles, and there is absolutely no time left. The adept desperately wanted to become stronger, but did not know how to achieve this. He seriously asked Denali to give him what he truly needed. The goddess paused for a moment. Smiling, she said that she could guess what the guy was talking about. He needed time. Noah excitedly asked if she could really give him this invaluable resource. The goddess moved her fingers, and a symbol formed on the guy's chest. With it he will go to Fremont and show the sign to Edward. God of time, he will give Miller a test. The guy's enthusiasm subsided when Denali said that her tests would seem like flowers to him, although that's what attracted him to them. Since here, in Edward's monastery, for the tests he has passed, he will receive as a reward exactly as much as they are difficult. Dangers and difficulties will await the adept. Noah grinned. After all, this is exactly what he needs. The goddess bent her finger. This was the guy's first reward for defeating Casper. The next reward will be for 3 years of trials. Miller noted Denali's generosity, to which she replied that the gods are not petty. She presented the guy with his second award. Denali snapped her fingers, and a red-haired man in a blue suit appeared next to her, bowing deeply. With the help of the patronage of the goddess, Noah would be able to enter the ranks of Erebris. The stranger raised his head, his sharp nose, a scar on his temple and yellow eyes, one with a sparkling pince-nez, became better visible. He straightened up and introduced himself Neville, a representative of the Erebris Guild. He looked at Noah with an emotionless face, his voice sounding skeptical as he asked Denali if this was the gentleman she wanted to recommend to him. The guy's lips pursed when the man very politely but sharply said that with all due respect, he did not live up to the level of their guild. The goddess asked him to take a closer look. The red-haired man opened his eyes as if he had just received his sight. He bowed again and asked for forgiveness, saying that he had looked more closely and realized that Noah was like them. Neville explained that he made this conclusion based on Noah's low level of martial arts proficiency. He began to seethe with indignation. At his age, he had achieved a fairly high level of martial arts. Usually a person with such a level is respected in society. Is this still not suitable for the guild? Miller, with annoyance in his voice, asked what kind of guild this was. Neville explained that Erebris supplies elite clients with the rarest and most exquisite goods, takes orders, conducts auctions for rare artifacts, obtains information, and much more. Noah clarified whether the guild was a merchant of elixirs and martial arts books. The red-haired man nodded, and a sign with information appeared before Noah's eyes. There, the amazed adept saw priceless artifacts, the Shaolin elixir of restoration, which heals all wounds and restores chi energy, a rare 1,000-year-old root vegetable, which also increases chi, as well as many rare combat techniques of the plum blossom sword and arbon sword sex. Neville bowed again and modestly noted that this was their job. He praised Noah for his good knowledge and assured that he would be pleased with the assortment of rarities and curiosities of the Erebris Guild. Miller also learned that the goddess Denali was also a member of this guild. Who are they really, even if Denali is their client? Neville extended his hand to the guy and asked if he agreed to become a client of the Erebris Guild. He still had nothing to lose. Noah agreed. This was followed by formalities and many signatures on magical papers. Stuffing the envelope with the documents into his jacket pocket, the red-haired man congratulated Miller and said that he was looking forward to their collaboration. Snapping his fingers, Neville said that it would be a special prize from him personally. Noah was instantly transformed. His long hair was neatly cut. His rags were replaced by new and clean clothes. The merchant commented that it was much better this way, and Denali also praised him. She didn't like that Noah had long hair like hers. Bowing, Neville disappeared in a haze, saying goodbye that the adept could call him at any time if he was needed. Denali turned to Miller and asked if he was pleased with the reward. The adept warmly agreed and thanked her. The goddess winked. Becoming an honorary buyer in the Erebris Guild is a great honor. It is very valuable. Denali asked the guy where he was going. He replied that he was going to Memphis. The goddess looked at one of her best adherents for the last time, but Noah did not take his eyes off her. As she left, Denali ordered him to never forget her monologue. There's a reason he's back. Nothing happens in Akron without a reason. Noah, walking through the forest, thought about the words of the goddess. Even at that moment when he met a pack of monsters that looked like hyenas, who were walking towards him on their hind legs and holding swords in their hands. He is lucky in this life, meeting with Liam Vaish, with Ava Collins, who helped the guy so much. Isn't this a coincidence? The sharp sting of the spear buried itself in the enemy's muzzle, but this did not interrupt Noah's flow of thoughts. Deftly wielding a spear that literally cut the bodies of hyenas in half, the guy wondered who arranged all those fateful meetings. However, who cares why he needs this headache? The guy, playfully, found himself here and there, confusing the monsters and depriving them of their heads. The spear, sprinkled with someone else's blood, glowed with a blue glow, the chi of the weapon. 3 years of training in the mountains turned Miller into a supreme martial artist. His body is 18 years old, and he is already a supreme master. People will think that he is some kind of natural genius. Wiping the blood from his cut lip with the back of his hand, Noah thought that his skill was gained through sweat and blood, as well as luck in the form of fateful meetings. He had a long way to go. Many unexpected acquaintances will make him stronger. The adept needed to get to Memphis, but first, Noah decided that he would become a mercenary again. The warrior once learned about Devnark, a magical armor found in the dungeon of a black magician in the vicinity of Memphis. This luck befell a C-rank mercenary, and the properties of the armor are truly incredible. In it, even a mercenary of this rank received the level of martial arts proficiency, the highest master. If a supreme martial artist obtained this armor, it would increase his level to a master of martial arts. Noah could continue testing on Mount Denali, but he wanted to use this opportunity. The guy was sitting by the fire, tearing off large pieces of meat cooked over the fire with his teeth. In 6 months, as far as he knew from his past life, the Black Magician's dungeon will be ruined. Therefore, the warrior's immediate goal is to become a famous mercenary in Memphis in order to be able to participate in this raid. Mercenary Guild Building, Memphis, City Tavern. A tall man stood in front of Noah. He was holding a bottle of wine in his hands, but he looked in surprise at the guy who told him from the doorway that he wanted to be a mercenary. Calling himself an ordinary innkeeper, he ordered Noah to go up to the 2nd floor to the guild clerk and ask him. The man himself referred to being busy. A stranger in armor was sitting at a table nearby, holding a fork. Having heard the conversation, he laughed at the guy, noting that it would be better for him to get a job in the kitchen to wash the dishes. In the blink of an eye, the fork disappeared from his hand. It was Noah. Without raising an eyebrow, with one wave of his hand he took the device from the man with the help of a chi weapon. The same one looked in surprise under the table, looking for the loss. The innkeeper raised an eyebrow and stared at the fork in Noah's hands.